This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the town of North Haven.
Now we're live to go. Welcome, everyone. If you can give me 1 second, this starts our budget process. Everyone is here. Today we have library, community service, rec, and fire. Basically, they'll make a presentation to us. We can ask them questions. I'm going to do something similar to what we did during the normal budget process. Because it's Zoom-type meetings and such, so everyone can understand who's talking. We'll go through the list like we did last time. Start with my years of service on the board. So it'll start with Mr. Donahue, Mr. Hallahan, Diane, Jim, Nancy, and then I'll finish up. I'll go last, it's fine with me. But having said that, if you'd like to take us through your presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
before we start, if I could just ask a question.
Yes.
So Ed, in the past, when we started this meeting, I have to admit, I've been the one that's been confused because we've had documents where the department heads start talking about something else, and then we have this, and I start flipping back and forth and asking myself, where are the real numbers here? So which of these documents should we be looking at?
Well, the budget that we presented, provided with everybody is based on the information received from the departments over the past month. So we put that together this past week and a half, distributed at the Board of Selectmen workshop last week, and made 2 or 3 minor changes to it, but that's the numbers we were given when we submitted. The departments could go after that, make changes, update things, come up with a presentation, but the document we were presented with is in this budget that you were handed out.
So they should be talking to this document.
Correct.
Everyone here has a copy of this?
And there's
No?
there's 2 different versions, right? So we have the 111 Board of Selectmen's version of the budget packet, it's just the town side, and then we have the 120 Board of Finance version of the packet that we just received. And as Ed said, there are some slight changes.
Some slight differences. Use the 120.
120.
120.
Everyone.
There's only 2 or 3
Out the
little
120?
changes, just to get it,
A few
just to
changes.
improve it each
Right.
time we went along.
I didn't get the 111, I got the 120.
I didn't get
Well, that's the one you
Oh,
want.
I got the 120.
That's the most recent.
All right, I got both. Right, I got both. And if I could just make a quick request before we get started, only because this frames all of the budget workshop presentations. If I could just ask Mr. Frieda again, and Ed, I know the numbers aren't finalized until the end of January, but if you could just give me a rough idea as to where we stand from a revenue standpoint in terms of both the grand list, and Mr. Frieda had an article, some quotes in the paper recently about actually the state funding being flat. So again, just in terms of framing the context for revenue as we discuss potential expenditures, that would be very helpful.
The revenue is done once we have the numbers from the state. It's always been like that. We don't have all the information. All we have is assumptions.
Yeah,
Right.
the assumption
And the
is.
assumptions are in it.
the
But
assump-
the grand list is finalized the end of this month,
Oh,
correct?
grand list will
Right.
have.
That's what I'm saying.
Right, so what is your question again?
So there's two parts in
Right.
terms of framing overall revenue.
Right.
One is the grand list. What does that look like? Again, it's not finalized, but just to give a rough idea of where we're standing from a revenue standpoint, and also funding from the state, which Mr. Frieda
Yeah, there's no
indicated
revenue.
in the local press, he expects, and again, not finalized,
Right.
expects will be flat this year.
Yeah, so I'll answer both those questions if you
Sure.
like, all right?
Thank
So I anticipate the grand list coming in at less than 1% growth. Somewhere perhaps anywhere from 0.3 to 0.5 in that range, roughly 0.5%, maybe slightly under. That would yield approximately 330,000, maybe 300 to 330,000 in incremental revenue. And on the state side, I actually spoke with Governor Lamont last week on this, and as we sit today, Saturday morning, the projection is flat funded. But as I said at the Board of Selectmen meeting, that everything's in real time. Things change every day. And what we're going to see shortly, an announcement that the state may be able to closed their fiscal year gap because of incremental revenue coming in that they hadn't forecasted. So the answers as we sit here today on Saturday morning, less than 1% grand list growth and flat funding. If anything were to change out of those two answers, the funding could change. The grand list will definitely come in less than 1%.
Okay, that's very helpful, and I think we're all actually kind of thrilled to hear flat funding because that means the same as what we got last year.
Exactly.
So that would be great,
Exactly.
especially since some of us were kind of pessimistic that we'd get any money from the state this year. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So if you'd like to take us through your presentation, our Director of Libraries.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I do want to thank members of our library board that are here, Kathy Inhofe, Michael Fletcher, Ralph Black, and Ruth Rice, as well as Shona DeStefano, our assistant director, who is very distant from me in the office. And we appreciate the support. Last year was my first year presenting the budget, and I'd only been in the position about a month and a half. Very shortly after that, COVID hit America, and so much in America, and specifically the library, has had to change. I always try to think positively, and I feel that there are some silver linings resulting from dealing with the pandemic. We had to close our doors to the public several times, and are currently closed for browsing and computer use. Silver lining, we now offer our patrons services we didn't think were possible pre-pandemic, such as grab and go, contactless pickups and returns. We were able to get locks installed on our book drops, which we didn't think was possible. This enables us to keep the book drops open on the weekends and still quarantine our returned items. Even with us closed, our patrons are still able to get all of their print and digital requests. We did have to furlough our part-time staff members in April, and 2 of our 7 full-time staff members resigned after the pandemic started. And we've been very short-handed. Silver lining, we were able to save the town some money when the full-time positions were not filled right away. Our part-timers have been able to return to work. Not everybody in America has had that happen, and they're crucial to our work, so it's great. We're in the process of hiring 2 new librarians to fill those positions, and we're excited about bringing in some fresh ideas. And our team has really pulled together to make everything work. Our staff has grown closer while distancing. Because of the pandemic, we've had such a significant impact on the library. I've broken up the report into 2 areas. I compared our pre-pandemic months of fiscal year 1920 to the same period of the previous fiscal year, so not affected by the pandemic. And then I will discuss the services and the usage impact since the pandemic started. So everybody should have a printout of my presentation. So if you can go to the first page, which starts with program staff pre-pandemic. So going over our programs, we had 166 adult programs in 18-19, jumped to 206 for a 24% increase, with attendance going from 2,465 to 3,300. So 34% increase in attendance for the adults. Our children's program went from 205 to 265 for a 29% increase, and 5326 in attendance to 7297 for a 37% increase. So overall, when you combine those, we had a 27% increase in the programs we've offered, which resulted in a 35% increase in attendance. So it's quite a few more people coming to our library, entering our building, and enjoying the programs that we've been able to provide for them. Before I move on from programs, does anybody have any questions on that?
Let's try and say the question again, just because of the format we're using, please.
Continue, I'm sorry.
Yes, continue, please.
Thank you. Okay, our circulation stats, the next page. Our adult materials, so it's divided into 2 different types of materials. Physical materials are books, audio books, DVDs, music, things you would check out and take home with you. Digital materials are downloadable ebooks, audio books, streaming TV, movies, and music. So you get them on your computer or tablet. So our adult materials went from $53,489 to $60,936 for for a 14.6% increase. And the digital materials went from 11,694 to 13,324, also a 14% increase, 14.2. Our children's materials for the physical were 55,464 and up over 10,000 to 64,936 for a 19.6% increase. Prior to the pandemic, children were not accessing the digital resources nearly as much as the adults. I'm really curious to see how that changes as we move forward. But they went from 532 to 567. So overall, we had a 14% increase in all of our circulation, so that's significant. On the next page, since the pandemic started, our new library resources that we've been able to put into place are Zoom program. None of us had ever done a Zoom program for the public prior to COVID. So it was a little bit of a learning curve, but when we were shut down, our staff did quite a bit of professional development, and we tried to figure out how we could not only provide Zoom programs, but make them decent and make people want to come to them, especially the kids who are on distance learning. Like, what could we do to attract them? Hence Noodleman. He resulted from some staff professional development. And side story about Noodleman, one of the 4-year-olds that attends our programs with Noodleman was the only thing on his Christmas list this year. And it's kind of tough because Noodleman was created by our library staff, so that put the parent in a very difficult position because you can't go to the store and buy Noodleman. But our Zoom programs, we have offered 50 for the adults with 623 in attendance. And our children's programs, we had 33 with 616 attendance. Online library cards, we never did online cards before because we require proof of residency, and we had people come into the library to get the cards. So, we figured out a way that we can do this online and still figure out a way to identify people's, prove their residency. So, in the fiscal year 1920, we have 8,855 registered library card holders, but we added 332 cards online. And we average about 54 per month, so that's a significant number because we're almost dead on for the amount of people we registered online versus coming in. And we were open, our doors were open from July through mid-November. So there were, in addition to 332 cards, people came in person and got cards too. So that was a significant service we could offer people. And our grab and go contactless pickups and returns. We started this service on July 2020, and it's maybe difficult to see because the pictures are small, but the larger picture is if you called and you wanted to pick up a hold, as long as your item's on the hold shelf, we put it in a bag, you say, I'm on my way. We put it in a bag, put your name on it, and we put it in our library vestibule, so you don't have to have any contact with the staff, and you can just come in and grab it and go. The smaller picture is our quarantine setup, and items are required to be quarantined for 4 days. So without the staff having to touch items, and without the patrons having to make any contact with staff members, we set up a row of tables for every day. And the items, patrons walk in, put the items on the table, and they sit there for 4 days, and then they're checked in. So everything should be safe at that point for everything. So since that point, since July when we opened up for our grab and go contactless pickups, we have checked out 37,658 items. So still being able to, everybody can get all the items that they like. The next page is some financial highlights. So budgets are about asking for funding, asking to spend money. So I wanted to highlight some areas where the town didn't have to spend money, and where the library is trying to save the town money. Last year in our capital portion of the program, my request, I mentioned that I thought our boilers were on their way out. I thought that they were going to not make it a full year. And unfortunately that came to fruition. and they officially, both boilers completely failed on October 21st, 2020. We currently have a temporary boiler outside in the parking lot heating our building, which we're thankful for. The opportunity came about for a STEVE grant, and how the state provided those grants had changed. And I suggested that we use the boilers for the STEVE grant, and we were fortunate to get that grant. And so now that the boilers are being funded by the state for $115,000, and we're in the process of that now. I sit on the Long-Term Recovery Planning Committee, which has formed since COVID started, and it's different community members who have come together trying to figure out how we can serve our community during COVID-19, because we have many needs that have resulted from COVID. And we put together a survey, and that survey had showed that stress and anxiety are extraordinarily high in our community, and that is on par with the rest of the country. With the results of that, I used that information and applied for a grant from the National Library of Medicine. And the grant was funded in two parts, a speaker series to address stress and anxiety, and also we asked for a smart presentation board so that we can use this for future Zoom type meetings, conferences, and also so we can show our community how to find reliable health information. We were awarded that grant for $8,873 for the full program. We have filmed our stress and anxiety programs, and they are available on our website now. There are 4 available. One is for middle and high school students. One is for 18 plus. One is for seniors, and we didn't want to be all doom and gloom, so we ended the program with using happiness to be blues. So those are all available if anyone would like to look at them on our website. And we did offer one for elementary school students, but we weren't able to record it because of the content that they used. As you know, our building is aging. It was redone in 2000, and everything seems to be going at once. Our internet connection now is through the Connecticut Education Network, but we do not connect directly to CEN. So we get our connection that goes from the high school to the annex to the library, and the fiber that services this connection is 20 years old, and it's approaching its end of life. So we are applying and working with the State Library of Connecticut for a grant to connect directly to the CEN, and which will be all new fiber. And the cost of that job is $74,270. So the state had to get their grant so that they can start working to disperse the grant. So I'm applying with the state library now, but the state library has received their funding. So that's more than half the balance. So that is in the process, and I hope that next year I'll be able to report that we have received this grant. Next page, financial highlights. This is something that I need to bring particular attention to. For a while, the library was closed when we didn't even know we could do grab-and-go pickups, and nobody wanted to leave their houses. So digital usage is up dramatically. We offer paid digital resources. We have some additional resources that we get through the state that I haven't included here because they don't come out of our budget. But Hoopla, Overdrive, and Harvey Digital come out of our budget. And the 2 red lines on the graph are pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So we went from 6,089 April to December last year to $24,205. We had a 297% increase in cost. So usage is just about double, and the demand for digital content is incredibly high. So now I'm going to move on to the request. So I've highlighted on the sheet that everybody has there any of the changes. So at the beginning of the meeting, somebody had asked what was the difference. So this is the only difference you're gonna see in your latest sheet. And I left it in here to highlight it because I felt that was important. Our personnel line, for part-timers was 140 to 200. And I did request what was, used for current staff in 18-19 for that to be, bumped up to 163,500. I believe it still says 148,2 there, but I still figured I wanted to put it out there. This is when we're fully staffed and back up and open, and what we use to make the library run. So I wasn't asking for anything additional, I was just asking for the funding that was used previously. Do you want me to wait for questions till after I do each line? Or do you
No.
want me to go through the whole thing?
If you can go through the whole thing and then we'll go back.
Sure, thanks. Our water usage was up to 2336, so I made 2350 just to try to cover that. Our telephone is a contracted price, so that's an extra $550. Our custodial contract has jumped significantly, and there's two reasons. Small reason is a minimum wage increase, which there's no choice on. And then there's also, we do not have a custodian on site. So the state of Connecticut has required libraries to do deep cleaning midday, and we had to bring our custodial contractors in to do that. So that has been an added unexpected expense. And they also use a sanitizing spray a couple times a week. And I budgeted for 6 months to go through December. We have no idea when the pandemic is going to end, and I mean, it would be great if we no longer have to follow this procedure and lessen that in September. But I figured it was smart to use 6 months, and let's hope by then this portion has ended and we no longer need to close for midday. Our books, magazine, and reference, our materials line. This one's going to give you a little bit more background on. In 1920, fiscal year 1920, this line was funded at $105,748. During the beginning of the pandemic, no suppliers were shipping any materials. So we didn't get books, anything. We got no shipments for 2 months. So I did not feel that I had to spend the full line just to spend it. I was respectful that the town was having to spend unexpected money on PPE and would hopefully be able to use the money that we didn't spend in that line elsewhere. So we were funded at $105,748 and we spent $95,974. So we gave back about $10,000. At the last budget hearing, I asked only for an inflation increase. I'm not sure why, but the budget line was cut to $30,748. And this was long before the pandemic started. So we went from $105,748 to $75,000 last year. Our usage and material costs are up significantly. With an almost 300% increase in cost for digital items, I'm asking that you fund the amount that we spent last year. I'm not asking you to reinstate the 105 because I realize that everybody needs to try to make the cuts because it's a very tough fiscal year. But I'm asking for the 95,974 to try to keep up with the digital demand and increase cost of circulation numbers. And additionally, we don't know how long the library will remain closed, and it's crucial that we stay in step with demand for digital items. Even if the pandemic ended tomorrow, I don't foresee a drop in usage of our digital items. Our patrons have grown to love them. I mean, they use them all the time. So I think that that's a trend that's only going to push forward. And that's it for the materials line. And then the professional development was at 0 last year, and I believe that's because we were under contract negotiations. And so the 2,100 that's on here now is due to the new contract. Does anybody have any questions on my my budget request for this year?
Jim?
Sue, thank you very much. I thought as you went through your presentation, you got some nice impressive increases in participation of the library with the same resources you had the last year.
Sue's having a problem hearing us.
I'm having a little bit difficulty hearing you. Would you be able to speak up?
Alex, they're having problems hearing us. Anything we can do on our side?
Some people I'm having difficulty hearing.
Should read louder.
Yeah,
Can you hear me now, Sue?
Yes, that's much better.
maybe you should talk directly into your mic.
Yes. Okay, I'll skip the preamble then and get to my two questions. So the $95,000 for the books, magazines, references. So it looks like from what you presented, about 24,000 of that is essentially the cost of downloads, correct?
24,000 would be the cost of downloads, essentially, yes.
All right, so
Well, we had spent 6,000 before, so it's 18,000 more than we had spent last year.
just give me an idea, what do we spend the other $70,000 a year on, please?
Mostly books. Really, it's books, audio books, like CDs that you would take out. We don't buy too much music now because people use the streaming services. I'm trying to think. We recently bought more. They're called playaways, and they're they're real small. They almost look like an old-fashioned iPod, but it would be one book that's there. And that's great because you can listen to it in your car, you can take it home, into your house, and you just put your headphones right into it, or you can listen to it in your car. And those are individual units, so they're essentially books on tape. It's all the library materials. And we bought a significant amount of backpacks because we're in our children's department. They're extraordinarily popular, so you would pick it up and go on a hike. So it's a bag, and it's got, say, a magnifying glass and a book about pipes and how to identify bugs. And so they're kits that you can use. So they're all the library materials.
Okay, so I happen to be one of those people that still reads books. Do we find that the number or the percentage of books that are being checked out annually has changed? Has that gone down dramatically?
So did you ask if the percentage of books has gone down?
Yes, the percentage or number of books that people check out, has that gone down over the years?
No, it's up. I'm just going to go back to my sheet so I can have here. Our circulation, we're up 14%, over 14% for the whole library. So, and during COVID, it's hard to identify the true number because we were closed for months. So it looks, if I gave you the actual fiscal year numbers, we've got 4 months of zero, or, so that's why I compared last year's fiscal year up to the pandemic to the previous year. And the reason I'm asking for more in this line is.
All right, so you're up 15% there, you're saying, right? Is that what
Yeah,
this
we're
is?
up, we're
Okay.
up.
Here's my other question. So I have one or two different documents on the library here. In one case, it does show the increase in personnel part-time. The other one just has that at flat, but your total personnel going up 40. So is that a combination of regular cost of living adjustments and the additional part-time? What is that 40 altogether?
So you're asking me what the difference is in the personnel part-time line?
I'm really asking what your total salary increase is between full-time and part-time.
I don't know our full salary increase off the top of my head on the full-timer. They are contracted by union, so we're required to, whatever their steps are, we're required to fund that. I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head. I apologize.
Tim, I think what might have happened is, when finance put the numbers in, they put everything on the
Well, that's what I'm
full-time
guessing,
line
yeah, right.
instead of splitting
Yeah.
it between full and part-time. Because the full-time line went up by 7%.
I yield
Full-time
time.
went up 4 now.
No?
Yeah, well, no, that's what's listed here. If you go from 586 to 625,
Yes,
Yes,
so that's
that's
40. Right now
that's
it's
my
40.
40, yeah. Right.
But you're saying that should be split up.
I think.
I think that's what it's supposed to be, I think.
Full, No,
it's
full-
different numbers,
full-time line went up because the contract was settled.
yes.
If the contract's out for 2 years,
Okay.
the first year would be 2.5, second year 5, a 7.5% increase from what it was. Because don't forget, we keep the difference in the contractual obligation account. So this is a jump from maybe 2 years ago.
Okay. What's being presented to us does not include
Okay, so that, yeah, it does, right.
her increase in part-time.
Right.
Her request for an increase in part-time.
Yeah, we actually have different accounts for part-time. And I think the original amount that's listed in the packet that we got regarding the library was the 163.5, that's her request. But in the budget, it's actually flat and kept exactly the same. So I think Sue was just pointing out that there's actually a 10% increase in part-time salaries. And so is that your question, Tim, is why is there an increase?
Well, my question was, what's the real answer, and I think you just determined it.
Right, so it's a 7% increase in full-time
Yeah.
and 10%.
Right, okay.
You have anything else, Tim?
I yield to Mike.
Michael?
With all due respect, I thought I had the most seniority here, sir.
I think you were right, but you just were drunk.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, could you recalculate that at some point?
Tim was.
No, Mike is correct.
Important position.
Not based
I think
on
Mike is
arrival
right.
time.
All right, next round, your first.
Well,
Yeah.
we understand Tim's wife's situation. We have been with him for a while. You're right. Okay, in the meantime, the first question I always ask the library, I have no idea why, but out of habit, how's the roof doing? Hey, that's my question. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Leanos would have asked the same question, so I'm jumping ahead.
Right.
The roof?
Yeah, so far the roof is doing well. We did have a problem with the gutters and downspouts, and we had that repaired. And I'm actually intrigued, our chiller, so when the water is cold, when the boilers are working, they keep the water going through the building at a certain temperature. When the boilers fail, quite often I found out that our boilers were off for the day, when it wasn't too cold out yet, because they would drop and then the gaskets around the chiller, the chilled water would shrink and we would start to get leaks. And so we would notice that the ceiling was leaking, which we previously thought was the roof. But it turns out that it's the boiler's failing and the chilled water causing the gaskets to shrink and it's causing leaks. So the leaks have been repaired, or the gaskets have been repaired, but I don't know how much of the previous leak problems were actually the roof or if they were boiler problems.
All these years we were repairing the roof. It was the air conditioner, it was the chiller system, possibly.
Yeah, it's possible that that's where it was because we found different places in the building with leaks all over and it wasn't the roof.
That's good. That would explain why we could never find the source of the roof leak. Wow. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
I guess, until that's.
Yeah, I haven't had anybody come out here and inspect it, but maybe next year. I already kind of threw a lot in the capital, so without any major problems, I'm not poking that bear.
Okay. Yeah, the computer stations, of course, not being used now, but they're going to be in demand again once people start entering the building. Do we usually replace about 7 or 8 stations per year, just to do it on a rolling basis?
We replaced last fiscal year, as part of the capital budget, 2 years ago, we had a full replacement model of the adult computers, and I think there are 14 of them. So the adult computers are basically brand new and in great shape. And then last year I requested that the children's computers be, that's the typical replacement, and that was cut, but I used the materials budget to get those because we weren't getting as many books for 2 months. So I tried to be smart and replace those and not have to put it back into capital.
Okay, so your 5-year plan shows that you don't need any more computers replaced until 24, 25?
Correct. I can go over the capital request on the next page if you would like to do that now.
Oh.
Or if anybody has more questions, whenever you're ready, let me know, but I did
Well,
write it down.
since you started this,
Mr. Chairman, you can let her finish the presentation.
All right, give us a quick recap of your capital then. I don't
Okay, so
actually see anything in this,
Last page.
I'm sorry, what was the last comment?
I'm sorry.
There's a generator.
No, please do your capital.
Okay, so So I did ask last year for staff lockers, and I showed you pictures then. I didn't provide them today because we talked about it last time. They're still pretty beat up. So I asked for $3,000 for staff lockers. The generator, this is in addition to the initial request, I believe, because after I submitted my budget in December 6th, I was told that our generator is failing, and it keeps failing, and it was gonna need a full replacement. So I've been trying to work with different contractors since. So 125 was put into the budget. I was told it was not repairable. Since I've had contractors in the building, they were all in, I had several contractors in this week. I did find out that there are some replacement parts on order. They expect that they should do the trip. There was two different people's opinions who told me. So I apologize that I was told it was gonna fail, and it hopefully doesn't. What they need to do is make the repairs. And then they have to, like on a Saturday or something, like shut the whole system down and make it fail, and then run the generator. As long as it works, then we're good and we won't actually need a generator. However, if it fails, we need a generator very soon. So I got 3 quotes. They actually came in last night around 5 o'clock, so I don't have it on your sheet because I'd already sent it to the finance department yesterday. And the quotes came in at $33,340, $39,963, and $51,500. So we might be safe to change that number to 40,000, and I can forward that on to Ed in the finance department, the quotes that I've received. But it's only if it fails will we need this, but we have to plan for it because you can't not have a generator. The furniture I put in, as I said before, our building is aging, so I put $5,000 in 2 years in a row, in 2 years, to replace the soft seating, because it'll be 22 years old. And those are just the comfy chairs that, people hang out and read.
That's not next year though.
Chiller replacement.
Right.
That is another biggie. That has been failing. We had them in here to do numerous repairs. It's not imminent for this year. Our HVAC mechanic believes we should be able to get by for a little while. I did try to see if we could piggyback the chiller replacement onto the steep grant, but it came in significantly higher than we expected. So I do have a full replacement quote, but it uses R22 gas to chill the water. If they have to drain the system, R22 gas is no longer available to import into the country, so there's only a certain stockpile that's here. As that stockpile dwindles and gets used, we have less chance of getting R22, and the cost is going to jump significantly. So with the system having the problems that it has been having, and the R22 being a factor, I put in for a full chiller replacement at $115,000 for next year. I put in for the following year, replacing the adult circulation and reference. I put this in capital last year, and I want to combine for services, so everything is done at one desk. But in addition, it's 24-year-old furniture, and the furniture itself is not in terrible shape. Our counters are in horrible shape. So if we were going to spend the money on the counters, I'd really like to make that change. And they're all the laminates worn through. You can see like the program. PC replacements, as you had asked before, those are 24, 25 would be for adult, and 25, 26 for the children's. And again, with the aging building, our carpet will be 25 years old and 25, 26, and we have a large amount of weird patterns in front of our desks in our common walk area. The carpet is in decent shape in the areas that don't get carts driven on them, and consistent walking patterns. It's not terrible. You really have to replace it all, and so that's a $200,000 cost. But I'll tell you that I've talked to a couple different carpet, commercial carpet installation companies, and most of that, not most, but about half of that cost is moving the furniture, because it's not typical furniture moving. You have to, we have to get a company in here pretty much to clear out all of our shelves and move our big racks. And, there's a possibility of going up to the racks, but then if we ever need to change anything, we can't. So the proper way to do this would be to have a service come in, move everything, install the carpets, and then put it all back. So that is my 5-year this year capital and then my 5-year capital. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, sir. Mike, you want to continue with yours?
Sure, thank you very much so far, done a great job. The digital resources that have increased, I guess now to 24,000 and change. What line is that a part of? Is that part of?
It's in the 95 line.
It's in the books and magazines.
Yep, that's where I asked for the increase, the books,
It's-
magazines. I call it materials, but it's books,
Yeah, because
magazines.
it's listed differently on our monthly report. It's listed as library materials.
It's library materials.
Right, but in the,
It's
in
the
the budget, books,
701-703.
All right, so that increase to 95,000 is inclusive of the digital increase in demand?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for letting us know the COVID effect on your department. Just in closing my part, I just wanted to say thank you very much for maintaining the Rotary Corner. As a Rotarian, I just want to thank you very much for that resource area of the library, the Rotary Corner. In honor of John Drake.
That's right.
You're welcome. No, it's wonderful that we are able to still provide that, and it's significantly used, so it's a win-win.
It provides direction for the lost and weary. Okay.
Thanks.
Continue.
Diane, anything? Diane?
Yeah, I have a question. So you talked about the hops that the fiber optic network needs to make to, it's going multiple hops, not straight through. So how does that affect the performance of people using the system? The more additional hops that you usually make, that means the effect or the response time is not as good as you would like it to be.
It actually is not gonna make a difference. It's, I can pull my CEN numbers out. Our bandwidth, we're using about 50% of less than 50% of the bandwidth that's provided for us now. It's just that the connection not being direct to CEN, if anything, we have potential different areas where it can go down because CEN connects to the high school connects to the annex connects to the library, and it's older fiber. So it's not about the speed. Because we're getting from the CEN, we do have good speed. It's just we have a lot of potential to fail, and the fibers are aging and are going to need to be replaced anyway. So direct connection is just a better choice. And it also keeps us on our own network separate from the town. That's an additional benefit, especially for security.
Yes, security is important. I did have a question.
Yeah, we don't want to be on the town network. We're kind of half on the town network now and half not.
Yeah, you probably should totally be separated. Another question on your capital. So do we still have desktop PCs?
Yes.
So are they cheaper than laptops, or is it because laptops are more vulnerable? Thoughts on that?
Well, there people who come in to use the library computers don't necessarily want to take them home with them. They come in, they're not generally, not everybody's computer savvy and often need our reference librarians' help. So that's why we have the PCs there. I was thinking about trying to get a grant so we can get Chromebooks. I didn't put anything about this in the capital because I was thinking in the future and within the next year or two to try to get a grant because Chromebooks would give people like hotspot capability, not hotspot, but they would have internet access as well as the device if they took it home. Because if anybody wanted to circulate laptops, a lot of those people that would need those laptops don't actually have internet connections at home. And I did speak with the school about the digital divide to make sure, because some libraries circulate hotspots, and so you can have internet at home. But every student in town has, they have 100% like fill rate of internet use. So if a student didn't have internet use at availability at home, they either have hotspots that they're borrowing from the school or like a coupon for Comcast, free Comcast internet. So I'm thinking about doing Chromebooks, but in the future and hopefully with a grant.
Okay, there was another question, I just lost my frame of mind here. Totally lost it. Oh, the digital services. So do we charge for some, are there certain digital services that people access that there might be a fee?
We don't charge for anything.
You don't charge for anything, okay.
No. And our hoopla items they range from 50 cents to $2.99, I believe, for downloads. And our RB Digital are $2.99, and they get access to the platform for a week. So, for instance, Acorn TV is very popular. It's British TV. So if you checked out, it costs $2.99 per use, but you get the patient would have access for a week. So essentially, they could be spending $12 a month if they got it every week. We allow them one access, though we limit it because Hoopla we limit to 10 downloads a month.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi Sue, I'm Jim, and I just wanted to let you know that you're doing a great job over here. And in these troubled times, I think you're holding your own. I do have a question on the boilers. You said you saved the company, the town, $119,000. Is that for replacement? Do we have new boilers?
They're in the process of being ordered, working with Lynn Sadowski and a representative from the state because we were awarded the boiler replacement amount. So they haven't been ordered yet because we're getting all the paperwork and going back and forth with the state. So we have a temporary boiler, so that is costing us monthly to rent that. So that is an additional cost. But as soon as we get the green light, we're gonna order the boilers and it will be a full replacement.
And the boilers are not in the capital, so is it?
No, I asked for them in capital last year and they were put in to the 5-year capital plan, but not this year's capital plan. And again, because the steep grant had changed, usually it was a higher amount and we did some different things in town with it. But when it was a lower amount, I was like, please ask for boilers. And you know, they hadn't died yet, but like 2 weeks later they died.
So this 119, is that gonna cover the cost entirely, or is this just going to cover the
I think there's a small portion, about 2,500, that the town has to pay because we have to, because we're consulting on the project. There's a small, like we have to meet a very small amount, but I feel like it's $2,500.
Okay, fine. Now, the boilers are attached to the chillers?
No, they're two separate. What happens is they keep the water at a certain temperature even in the summer. If the cold water goes below like 40 degrees or 48 degrees, I think, that's when you start to have a lot of like the shrinkage on the pipe fittings. So that's why the boilers run when the chiller's running, but they're two separate entities or units.
And
Two boilers, one chiller.
And the condition of the chillers, are they up to snuff?
No, we had them in here probably about 7 or 8 times last year for repairs. At one point, I was literally for 2 weeks straight, walking outside in the rain and turning the chiller on and turning on our air handlers, with the power I was actually in the mechanical room every day, physically turning on and off each one of the chillers and the chiller and the air handler and there was another thing I was turning off too, and I apologize, I can't remember what it was. But I know more about the mechanics of this building than the apprentices they bring in here and things.
Well, okay, well, but I'm just wondering if the chillers are next in line, that's why I was asking.
Yeah, I think we could put it off for a year. I'm hoping, he's got it in working condition now, of course it's not working because it's too cold, but he's trying to keep the maintenance up. You never know. I mean, you never know, but part of the concern is that gas, the R22. You know, if we waited 3 years and tried to Band-Aid it for a few more years, that the gas that they need, like if they have to drain the system, they have to put gas into the system when they refill it. So if there's any significant leaks or anything, it can cost, if the repair will be so significant that it's not even worth it without replacing the chiller.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nancy?
Hi, Sue. This is Nancy Barrett. You may not be able to see me, but hopefully you can hear me. First of all, I just want to say I'm always thrilled that we start this budget workshop process with the library, because I truly believe that the library is the gem of North Havens. And so I really value what you do and all of the services that you provide to the entire community. So first of all, thank you very much for that. And second of all, congratulations on the award of the two grants, the STEEP grant as well as the National Library of Medicine grant. That's fantastic work, and best of luck with the State of Connecticut grant that you're in the process of applying for. I just wanted to clarify something regarding the STEEP grant. Again, as you pointed out, because the cost of the boilers was in the 5-year plan, not in the capital plan, it's not technically in the budget. So while I'm thrilled that we got the grant, it doesn't technically save the town any money because we haven't allocated the money. So I just wanted to point that out. So it's fantastic. Yeah. And in the future, if we didn't have this grant, we would absolutely have to spend the money. But I just wanted to point that out. And as far as questions go, I just wanted to ask, with the custodial contract increase of almost 47%, is that the type of thing that is impacted by closure? Because again, if the library is closed, you shouldn't have to do this midday spraying or additional cleaning, or is that just something that's mandated whether the library is open or closed?
Well, we still have staff here, and so they're still walking around and touching everything. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that we can stop the service and start the service necessarily. I can look into that, but we don't know when we're going to open again. So I just kind of left it in place because we do have staff here during the day. And there's up to 23 of us. So I left it intact for the safety of the staff. Okay. It is, I think she's here for 2 hours, and it's probably, I think it's like a minimum wage fee. So I don't think if we stop for like a month, it's not going to make a significant impact. So it's the 6th, running it through December. If we think that we're going to end up having to stay closed much longer, we can certainly revisit that.
Okay. All right. And regarding the increase in the pay per use digital resources. Again, if this is something that you think going forward is going to continue to be accessed and utilized, is there any way to transition from pay per use to some other contracted amount in which it's a flat fee? Because again, it doesn't from a financial standpoint, it doesn't make sense to continue to use the same pay per use paradigm if we think it's going to continue even post pandemic.
They don't offer it. I've looked into it. We have Hoopla. I'm just looking for my one sheet. There we go. Hoopla's pay per use. They are coming out with a flat rate, and I petition them because I try to save money everywhere I can, and I'm not necessarily quiet about it. Mm-hmm. So I've kind of petitioned, and they have a model that they're coming out with, but the cost of it was crazy, and it was in addition to offering, like you couldn't do the flat rate and the downloadable rate. It was not feasible. Overdrive is new. If you look at our pre-pandemic cost, it was $0. We actually get Overdrive as part of our Lion Library Consortium fees. Mm-hmm. And we pay into Overdrive as a whole. And it is sort of like they buy the books, individual books. It's like a book you would check out. So that's why there's often holds on it. But we started the Advantage program, that's why I went from 0 to 7,000. So we look at the highest checkouts, the highest holds, and then we bought as we needed more copies of those books so we can fill our patrons' holds. So that's not, you're paying per item, but not necessarily per download. So we try to get ahead of that, because if more items are available through Overdrive, which we have a little more control over, maybe Hoopla would go down. And RB Digital has recently been bought out by Overdrive, and I do not know if they're going to change their platform of how you purchase, but at this point, I haven't heard anything about it, and I don't anticipate that. That should be changing. They're the last to change over to Overdrive, which is in, I want to say like March or April. So I might have more updates, but there are no other flat rate. I mean, there was one company that had stuff, but it wasn't content that we needed, and it was like $20,000. So it wasn't worth it because it just wasn't worth it.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, again, just something that I thought was worth looking into, and it sounds like you already have, but we appreciate you continuing to pursue any flat rates, because again, if your expectation is that this is gonna continue to increase from, it's a very large percentage, it looks like it's increased about fourfold, that this will be an increased cost for the library. So, and then my last question, again, while it's fantastic to see all of these online programs and Zoom meetings and things like that, I'd just like to know what are we doing for our seniors who have actively utilized all of the library services pre-pandemic, but who do not have computers and therefore do not have access to Zoom, but are still missing out on book clubs and things like that they were able to participate in the past, but cannot now if they're not tech savvy and don't have access to the internet.
Actually, we're working, this is one of the, I mentioned that we have some great new services that weren't available prior to COVID. And we're working directly with the senior center. I have a really good relationship with Judy Amarone, who runs the senior center. And we started doing at-home deliveries through the senior center, because that was actually a wish for me to be able to do homebound deliveries, but it's tough because we have the liability of anybody going to somebody's house. We would have to look at a town vehicle or somebody using their own vehicle. There's a lot of problems that could arise if we did homebound deliveries. But with the senior center bus, once a week they come by, the patrons put their books on hold, we get them bagged up, and they come pick them up and they deliver them. So we're still all under the town, the umbrella, the liability, and we're working with them to get them their physical items, because a lot of them don't have tablets or don't want to read on an e-reader. So we are hitting the seniors that way. But I don't, it's tough. If they're not willing to get on Zoom, there's not much that we can do, because we can't, everybody wants to gather, and the library is such a social place, but unfortunately we can't be the place that people get sick right now.
Okay, all right, that's the only other question that I had, so thank you very much for your time, I appreciate it.
So there's only one final question before we let you go. The generator, what was your fuel source you were looking to use for the generator?
What was my what?
Fuel source, are you looking to use propane or gas?
No, it's not diesel, we're already on natural gas.
All I want to know.
Okay.
You got me. Thank you very much. We're running a little bit behind. So, excellent presentation. We're very impressed with actions of the library.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me or call.
Bye now.
Okay, take care.
You ready to go?
I'm ready to go. If we just need, Alice can just.
Anybody like a water or anything before we get to move in? Anything?
You guys just.
Okay, what page on?
Right, 33.
Okay, you're back on.
Thank you. Mrs. Kukowski, would you like to take us through community service, park and rec?
Sure, but I just, like to take a minute and just clarify some things we talked about here this morning. In regards to what Tim was talking about at the budget, just to let everybody to be clear, we get the information from each department, we put it into the first budget, which was dated January for the Board of Selectmen workshop. After that, we might have had one or a couple of changes, but in the interim, we're still talking with the departments, and if there's things that were wrong or need to be fixed or changed, we make those changes. So the most recent budget you should look at is the one dated for the Board of Finance meeting this coming Wednesday night. So that's how that works. And as far as the grants go, if it's a grant, it's not going to appear ever on page 38. It's going to appear in the 5-year capital plan because it's funded by sources outside of the general fund budget. So just so we're clear on that. Okay.
Which one do you want to do first? Community service?
I'll start on page 33.
Okay.
As you can see, community services is pretty much flat except for the personnel line. During this past year, we settled that contract and 2 other ones, Public Works and Library. And therefore, you'll see the only increase we have is in the personnel full-time line where it went up 13%. But over a 3-year period, that's a 2.5 plus a 5 plus a 7.5 for the 3rd year increase, which works out to roughly about 14-15%. So that is why that line went up. Everything else we've been able to deal with as is. Even with BH Care, I think they kept their contract. It might have gone up a little bit, so that's why you see 134,400 versus 134,000. And as far as the counselors go, they're doing telemed online with their clients, so that's working out great. The clients don't have to leave and come into the building, and the counselors are working from home, and everything's going smoothly because we're still billing like we normally would. And then the same thing's done in the private sector right now with the medical profession. So,
Yeah, we do our physicals online now.
right, but as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
So that takes care of community services. I'll quickly touch on these other ones on the next page, 34. Regional health and visiting nurse. Those are based on information they submit or requests for money. What they've asked for, as you can see, is 157 for Quinnipiac Valley and 32 for visiting nurse. But if you also notice, last year's actual in 1920, visiting nurse didn't even come anywhere near it. So they ask for a number, but if the services aren't provided, less is paid.
Okay.
So we don't just pay the flat amount and give it to them. Let's see, senior center. The only really change we have there, it would be on personnel full-time. There's a step increase included there. And outside that category, we've kept everything flat because I couldn't really justify any increase or any additional funds in that department.
A
at
big
this
drop
point.
in part-time?
Yeah, well, based on what's going on,
Yeah.
we haven't needed the people, so. It could change, but I doubt it's gonna exceed prior numbers of 50,000.
Okay.
So we left it, I brought it down to 37,580. Okay. The last thing on the next page is recreation. Again, wages increased because there was a step increase involved in this department. And the only line we actually looked for an increase in were pool chemicals and supplies because the cost of those have gone up. And if you look back to 1920, we paid 15 grand for it, and you've got to keep the pool clean and safe. Mm-hmm. So I have really no choice but to raise the line item for that right there.
And that's pretty much.
That's pretty much it.
Michael? Mr. Howland?
Yeah, going with the pool.
Yep.
Which line is that affected by?
Pool chemicals and
Chemicals and
supplies.
supplies, page 35?
Third from the bottom, page 35.
35.
35, okay, 35. Yeah, now, did we used to have a shutdown line for the pool for maintenance
Capital.
for every
Capital,
summer?
yeah.
Capital, and we cut that out last year, did we?
Yeah.
Now, is that something we want to
I-
start up again, was that a
Well, I can
mistake?
put it in there in the budget if you'd like.
Well, why was it considered a capital item
We
as
were doing
opposed?
they were doing.
Because, yeah,
tile-
right, They're doing repairs.
Yeah, so that's
Capital
a
repairs.
question about whether it's building maintenance or maintenance versus,
Yeah, the little stuff I could
reinvestment in
absorb in the
infrastructure.
budget, but if they were gonna replace tiles and pumps and things like that, then I'd put in the capital piece of it.
yeah. Okay, well, so it's still happening regardless of whether it's in capital or not.
Yeah, but we haven't doesn't look like I've got anything significant that I had to deal with right now, so.
Okay. All right, just to go back for 1 second to that first
Sure.
line you mentioned about personnel on, I think it was on 33. Yeah, so what were the contractual increases for personnel full-time?
2.5.
So it's 2.5 per year,
Right, so
For
first
3
year's
years.
2.5, second year's 5, third year's 7.5
7.5
from the base.
No, because it.
Each year it goes up.
Baseline.
Right, your base goes up,
from the base.
right.
So okay, so
So it
why,
grows 2.5 every year.
That's cumulative, Mike. He's giving you the.
no, even if it's compounded, why is it at 13%? Why is the increase
Because
at 13%?
2.5 plus 5 plus 7.5 is, 15.
No, wait. Okay,
So it's 3 years of increases.
yeah.
So that was year by year then.
Year by year, 2.5, 5, 7.5.
So they got a big jump in the third year and the second.
Oh, it's not a big jump, it's just they weren't paid anything, and don't forget, we kept it in the contractual obligation line, those
It's a
numbers.
cumulative amount.
Right.
It's not a 7.5% increase in the third year in terms of they're getting they're
No.
getting it retroactive.
Oh,
So it
okay.
accumulates.
The 7.5
Thank you, that
is
explains
based
it.
on the
Thank-
base year.
Right.
I'm sorry,
Everything
thank
goes
you.
up every year.
All right,
I'm in finance. I should
that
know.
answers the question, I think.
I
Okay.
apologize.
But it's 13 because we have to pay them
Right,
this year for the years, the last two they didn't
No.
get paid, right?
yes.
Yes.
But
Yes.
out of a different, out of the
That's what it's
contractual
saying.
That's
obligation.
out of the other
It's out of the
account.
account.
That's out,
It's not
right,
out of this account.
right.
No.
It's out of a
Oh,
different account.
well then, if
It's
it's out of it, if it's out of a different account,
For the
if it's out of a
retro,
different account, then the retroactive amount should not be in here.
but it's not.
Yes.
That's
because
the current rate, Mike,
Yes, because
It's the new salary.
right.
because this number, Mike, reflects the contract from 3 years ago. so
Right, that's a
it's got-
3-year-old number in the
yes, that's a
budget, right.
3-year-old number.
So the new number would jump all three
Yeah.
cumulative years.
Right,
We're not paying the cash from this account because the cash is held in a different account
charged by year, right.
that we keep, when we carry over to, that.
I think
I'll
what
explain to you later. Go on.
Ed, I think what we should do moving forward on this.
Yeah.
Is that when we do these budgets again next year, we're gonna put a separate sheet together and explain this so that this question gets
Well, the
answered in
thing,
advance,
if
okay?
the public sees this, they're gonna ask the same question I was just asking.
No, I don't
But
disagree.
this has
It's
been
gonna
there.
jump off the page
Right.
and, you know,
So
smack
we,
someone
it
in the
needs to
face.
be, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you brought it up, actually, because it may imply that they're getting a raise of 7.5% in 1 year. So that's what we're gonna do next year, Ed. We're
Yep.
gonna do that and explain it so that this question gets answered in advance,
Right.
so.
Look at it this way, Mike, the number from last year is a 3-year-old number.
That's why it's,
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right,
so even though the dollars are someplace else, in this budget, since the contract's settled, that's gonna increase all the way back 3 years.
okay. All right, I still
Yep.
see 2.5 times 3 to, equal around 9.5%.
2.5 plus 5 plus
Or
7.5.
sorry, 6, I'm sorry,
2.5.
7.5%.
2.5 for the first year. The second year, adds that 2.5 plus another 2.5.
That's 5.
Right, because you're going off an older number.
His problem is that he's looking at the 13%, he's getting 7.5. The reason it's 13, Mike, is because when you do the math off a much lower base, you're gonna get a higher number.
Yes.
Okay, I just thought that part of the higher number is put into the freight
It is.
increases. Yeah.
The numbers not, the dollars aren't coming from that line per se.
All right, we will
The
talk
back
about
pay.
it, we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Well,
Right.
Anything else?
I'll defer.
Anything else?
Anything else?
I was not gonna ask any questions, but Ed, just to wrap up Mike's conversation. On page, I think it's 25, we should see a reduction depending upon how many contracts are in negotiation, because you've settled some contracts, right?
Well, you might have settled some contracts as a negative, but you
got
have some other
some-
contracts that are gonna be added as a positive,
Okay.
like
But is
police.
the line the contract obligations line or the reserve accrued line? That
Contract obligation line would,
Right. That's
it
where,
actually went down some, yeah.
that's where the money was.
Right, for the open
That's where the money
contracts.
was, right, yes. Okay, no more questions.
Diane, anything?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Jim?
Ed, one question. The custodial contract, I noticed it's considerably lower than the library. Are we using one contract?
Same contractor, you're right. But in his contract, like any of the ones that bid on it, they wanted an escalation clause for minimum wage, which I can't deny.
Yeah.
So,
And last year, didn't we have an issue with, I thought Diane brought up about an issue about the car or something. Is that all squared away, or the van, whatever we had?
The bus, the senior center bus?
The senior center bus.
Yeah.
It's in the capital plan.
well, I still have money put aside for the replacement of it. I think we put some capital money away a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Excuse me. Well, you'll see that it's given the number in repairs, just to make sure that thing keeps running.
Yeah. Okay. All right, as long as we got our,
There is no capital, right?
I didn't see it.
Prior years. It's already, it's already out there.
Yeah.
Anything else, Jim?
I'm all set, thank you.
Diane?
I'm good.
I'm sorry, Nancy?
Okay, I'm gonna jump ahead to recreation, then come back to community service if I can. So, with recreation, if you could just look at the employment table on page 45. I just had a quick question regarding, the maintenance man 2 position. Again, that's, it's an 8.9% increase. And was there a contract renegotiation, or is that something different?
It might, if it jumped that much, it's probably a step increase.
And again, is that something,
By contract.
same question that I asked of the library director, is that something that is paid even if the pool is closed? Because again, I'm assuming that
He does other stuff there, yeah.
his chores and duties are actually much less if the pool is actually closed or not in use, and again, we have no idea how much it was actually used this last year. My guess is very little, and going forward, we really don't have any predictor.
Right, but he's a maintenance man, so he's taking care of the building and a lot of other cleanup and some of the pool, but that's not the whole thing, and he's paid a regular wage.
Right,
Yeah.
but it's almost a 9% increase, so I just thought that was pretty substantial, okay? And
Right, but
then,
that's the steps, in the contract, should they jump up, that's where you get a big jump.
right, and likewise, the assistant director of rec, that was also a 7.9% increase.
Probably same deal.
Okay, and then looping back, I think, to Mr. Hallahan's point regarding community service, I think it's more clear if you look at page 44, which is the employment table. So Mr. Swinkowski wears multiple hats, as we all know, and he serves as both the Director of Finance and the Director of Community Services, which is why he's presenting this today.
Correct.
And if you look, Ed, the traditional cost for our Director of Community Services has been about $8,000.
Right.
And for this proposed budget, it's gone from 8,656 to almost a little over $18,000. So that's a 110% increase.
Right.
And so, again, in looking at your combined salaries, both from Director of Finance and from this position, it looks like your salary is going up by about 10%. So that increase that you're talking about of 13% for the entire department, the lion's share of it is just from this particular jump in the Community Services Director's position. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, so
Well, no, because Counselor 3 went from 171 to 184. And don't forget, I'm losing, I don't have in here yet 26,000 in the grants because I haven't gotten the numbers from BH Care yet. Because the salary line of the 500,000 is going to be reduced by another 26 grand once I get figures from BH Care. Those, on page 44, those items are omitted at this point because I don't have the numbers yet.
So the overall 13% will go down.
Correct. Right. Because they subsidize us with 2 grants that they get and they pass them along to us. I just don't have those numbers yet.
Right.
They always come in a little bit later.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is there something about your position in community services that is dramatically changed?
Well, I think
Because
down,
you're not contract, you're not on a contract, right? that we-
I think it's only fair, Mike.
Mike,
let me explain.
Okay,
Sure, of
Okay.
course,
I'm
I'm just
trying to
trying to understand the nature
Yeah, I'm trying to
of
jump in
this.
for Ed here.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what's happening, okay? As this budget process moves forward, you're gonna see some changes that you don't see right now. Ed's gonna be taking on greater responsibilities starting in the fiscal year. And what we have in government is putting the Board of Education aside and the salary structures there. The top 3 positions in this government, put me aside, I'm irrelevant on this discussion, are the police chief, the fire chief, and the director of finance and administration. You're going to see in the next presentation that Chief Januszewski is going to be accepting and handling more responsibility, and you're going to see an added stipend for him. And we'll get into that perhaps in the next workshop session. What I'm trying to create here too is more of a balance in the parity structure of the salaries. Ed is arguably the number 2 man in the government, and the police chief makes more than Ed. The police chief deserves it. You'll see his salary in the budget. So because Ed's taking more responsibility and Paul's taking more responsibility starting in the fiscal year, we put these stipends in so that the top 3 positions are the same salary. The police chief, the fire chief, and the director of finance. We're trying to justify the increase for Ed and for Paul because they will be taking some significant responsibility starting July 1st, and that responsibility with the stipend creates the parity at the top 3 levels on the town side in terms of the highest paid personnel.
Mike, how do these new salaries stand up against area towns?
We're probably in the middle at best.
Okay.
I'd not say in the middle, not at best, I'd say in the middle.
Okay, that's good.
So.
So there doesn't seem to be a correlation though, as you say, if you're carving out yourself
Right.
and the superintendent of schools, there doesn't seem to be a correlation between power and impact and compensation, because obviously as the CEO of the town, you're not the highest paid, and the superintendent is the highest paid.
Right.
And he's certainly not the number 1, 2, or 3%.
Yeah.
So to carve out 2 people and say there's parity.
Well, no, let me explain. Your question is it's a good question, and it's a disparity that exists all across the state of Connecticut. So the chief elected officials are among the lower paid in terms of the structure. And when you come into this career, you've got to accept that, knowing that it's not about the money for people like me. But on the other side of this, for those people who are performing at high levels, who are taking on more responsibility, at least on the town side, I think parity is very important in the top 3 positions. So without this stipend for Ed, who's going to be taking on more responsibilities in July, he becomes 3rd in line in the top position. He's the number 2 man in the government. So the number 2 man in the government is making less than 2 of the department heads. So that's why the stipend's in there. Again, I want to, for those who are watching here, I want to make sure everyone understands that there's added responsibilities being taken over by Ed Swinkowski and by Paul Januszewski. Significant responsibilities. You'll see it in clearer focus as it relates to Ed as we get through this budget process. And somewhere in the March and April period, I make an announcement here that will further illustrate why he's taking on more responsibilities.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay?
So that's very helpful. I guess what I'm trying to get at, and you can answer it, is
Yep.
is the nature of his responsibilities that's increasing pertaining to his role as Director of Finance or Director of Community Services? Because if it is Director of Finance, then his salary as Director of Finance should increase proportionally, not as Director of Community Services.
It would be in the community services.
It is, okay.
It would be. It's going to be.
That is quite a tease. Let me tell you, stay
So.
tuned to Channel 20. That's unbelievable.
Same bad time, same bad channel.
Watch
Anything
it
else?
throughout March.
Your time's up.
Michael, we're late for the fire already. Nancy, did you have anything else?
That's all for now.
Wait,
Yep.
just one quick
Oh,
question
please.
here, because since mental health is covered by community services, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
the ongoing concern with all townspeople is, are we being served well by the subcontracting outfit that services us for mental health?
I have to say, I think you're doing an excellent job. We have a lot of resources. They help us anytime we need it, and everything's going pretty smoothly with the counseling work, so.
Okay.
And Michael, you have to admit, especially over the last 10 years, there's been a drastic increase in the amount of services
over there.
compared to what it used to be.
And then
Yeah.
revenue, since they've taken
And
over,
revenue
is more than
is
double.
offset it.
Right,
Yeah,
because they're billing all the time.
And not every city and town does what we do,
I know,
they have
so,
tremendous service there. Thank you, Mrs. Winkowski.
thank you.
good solution.
Alex, if we get the fire chief?
It's a beautiful place, we've been in there. Beautiful. I did some great.
You can still hear us clearly?
Yes.
Would you like to start taking us through your presentation then?
Well, certainly.
Sorry that we're late.
That's okay.
Don't make me say that.
Are you able to see my slides?
Yeah, we're seeing your screen.
Great. Give me 1 second here. All right, good morning. I'm happy to be here this morning. It's not snowing outside. I think it's one of the first fire department workshops on a Saturday morning where it's not snowing.
Correct.
So in the past, like I've done, I prepared a brief presentation to serve as a visual aid as it relates to the fire department budget for fiscal year 2020 or 21 and 22. I'm here today from the Emergency Operations Center, and within the center with me is Chairman of the Fire Commission, Pasquale Mazzolillo, and he'll be able to hear and speak with you as he wishes to do so.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Pat.
So at the conclusion of the workshop, I'll provide this presentation to the Finance Director, Ed Zukowski, and he'll be able to disseminate this as well as some other supporting documents to the Board of Finance. And I'll get started. So, just really quickly on mission statement, I think it's important to just highlight this. I'm not going to go into as much background as I have in the past. I don't think there's a reason to do so every single year. But this is what everything that we do revolves around, is being able to know what our mission statement is and allow it to be focused into how we conduct our business. Remember that we're all hazards and conducting a variety of different business now, most importantly, fire suppression and EMS, and that's what this budget presentation primarily focuses on. So progress since our last workshop, I'd like to cover this just because I feel like it gives us good starting off point to be able to talk about everything that's happened in only the last year. So, as I know has been talked about quite extensively, the PSA was reassigned to the North Haven Fire Department, and that plays a critical role in our daily operations. There's not a big budgetary impact to that at all. In fact, it's pretty much negligible. It allows us to continue to operate as we have in the past, and it's something that is well overdue, and it's improving services for EMS in our community tremendously. I'm not going to be able to share stats or anything to that extent anytime really soon. This conversion just happened in mid-October. We haven't even been through a quarter yet, but I would hope that by next budget workshop, I'll be able to share some good information with you. CERT continues to grow. CERT is playing a vital role in the community right now. They're actively engaged in helping with different functions at the rec center that it's been serving as in terms of giving out product for PPE for COVID and so forth, and they're actively working with the community, and it's because of this workshop in the past and the funding that was associated to be able to allow that to function. At this point in time, there's budget funding in place to allow the engine at Monolith Station to operate 75% of the time. Remember, the way that budget is structured is we are going to be putting a third shift down there in the next couple of months. We only are just now hiring those 2 firefighters because it was a mid-fiscal year hire. So really, when you look at the last calendar year, there's only been an engine down there 50% of the time. But again, funding's in place at this point for 75% of the time moving forward. 3 of our 4 stations in town have reliable backup generators. If they're not installed, they're funded for. The final generator for the volunteer station at the on Ridge Road will be getting installed sometime in the next couple of weeks. Perhaps one of the most significant improvements that took place in the last calendar year was the improvements to dispatch. Now, I know that dispatch falls under the police budget, but it's really a shared asset in many regards. And what's taken place with dispatch has really revolutionized the way that we're able to operate with the fire department. There are dedicated dispatchers now within the center. You think about what happened only a couple of years ago, there was one dispatcher at times covering the call taking, the police, and the fire. Things weren't always being done correctly. Now there are dedicated assigned dispatchers solely to fire, solely to police operations, and call takers. One of the things that this has allowed us to do is conduct emergency medical dispatching, which allows callers now calling with a medical emergency. That call is now triaged appropriately to determine which fire department asset should be sent to the call and to determine if a fire department asset needs to be sent to the call. And that's all done with software in place, and it's all authorized and signed off on by our local physician that allows those dispatchers to make those decisions. One of the things that we're moving forward with in the next couple of weeks, this is a slow, gradual rollout, which is why it's only happening now, is priority fire dispatching. That's going to allow us to dispatch fire incidents now in much the same way as medical incidents. Don't expect necessarily a lot to change necessarily in how we respond to incidents, but the information that we receive from every caller now for a fire incident will be much more standardized and will help operations. We're providing service now to our callers that are calling 911, our taxpayers and our visitors, that is now comparable to our surrounding communities. And we have seen a slight reduction in some of the responses the fire department goes to. Again, and I know we covered this during the focus group that we had put together a couple of years ago. There were calls that were periodically coming in to the 911 dispatch center that a fire department asset would be requested, and our dispatchers did not have the software, the training, or the authority to not send the fire department resource. So there were some calls that the fire department was responding to, not a lot, that we would not necessarily need to respond to. Present day, that's no longer happening. An ambulance only is sent, the call is quality control checked afterwards to ensure that it was handled properly, and that only an ambulance needed to be sent to that call. And then most recently, this is an addition, is we did secure a grant from FEMA through the AFG, which is the Assistance to Firefighters grant for $77,000. That was just announced this past week, and that is to purchase some PPE specific to COVID. Regarding our incidents, not a tremendous difference in terms of the calls responded to. Over the last 5 years, we had a 12% increase in calls, so our calls continue to trend up. This is how our calls break down: 4,875 alarms in calendar year 2020, 64% of which were EMS, 30% fire, and 6% motor vehicle accidents. As we've seen consistently in the past, 33% of the time there were multiple incidents occurring any given time in North Haven. And again, as I said, in 2019, it was our busiest year. 2020 was even busier than 2019. So we continue to see call volume increase, and that's highly attributed to an aging community, economic growth, and so forth. Speaking of economic growth, just to cover some of the properties in town and how they're contributing to call volume. Divine Street, this is a list of the calls that we responded to. You can see 2020 was less calls than the last couple of years. I attribute that in large part to COVID. Obviously, COVID had an impact on operations on Divine Street, and there was some healthcare visits that were delayed and not taking place, so that attributed to the fewer calls there. Harvard Healthcare, we know, is building a medical center on Universal Drive, and we're waiting to see what that's going to do for our call volume. The landing on Clayton Road, we responded there 88 times last year. And again, just thinking about moving forward, we know that there are over 600 apartments right now that are being planned for, some in the preliminary stages for North Haven. That will play a role in call volume moving forward. Know that Amazon, I believe when we discussed Amazon a number of years ago, and I talked about the projection of calls that we would expect to see at Amazon, and I referenced the different cities and towns that we had contacted with a similar building within their jurisdiction, we projected call volume to be somewhere around 80 to 120 calls. And last year, we were at 92 alarms. And then again, just watching future cluster development as we move forward. I believe there was a question in the past by a member of the Board of Finance regarding the call specifically at Amazon. And this year, I can tell you that of those 92 incidents responded to, 78 of them were medicals, 4 of them were motor vehicle accidents, and 10 of them were fire incidents. We continue to work heavily on recruitment and retainment of our volunteer firefighters. We continue to participate in local and national recruitment drives for our volunteers. As we sit present day, that's what we have in each of our stations for volunteers. Remember that a probationary member is somebody who is not yet qualified to be a firefighter. They are in the classes in various stages to become credentialed as a firefighter. We have a total roster at this time of 40 volunteers. We've worked hard in the last year specifically to increase the tax abatement and most recently to make some pension enhancements. And again, most of this is focused on retention of the volunteers that we have. We're continuing to expand upon the Explorer program we have in place. This has been a little hard for us to do in the last calendar year because of COVID. And we continue to move forward that program. We have a group of youths that are engaged, but we're a little hard pressed right now to do a whole lot of training in an environment that we can meet the requirements of COVID. But we continue to be in touch with those youths, and we have others that are interested. And as soon as we're able to, as we get through, hopefully the next couple of months, we're going to get that program going again. You see it on the slide, fulfillment of all requests by volunteer leadership. So as you've heard Mike Frieda say in the past, we've worked extensively with volunteer leadership to identify what their needs and their wants were. And this has taken place over the course of several years. And most recently, the meeting a couple years ago, they identified various aspects: training tower, pension enhancements, tax abatements, things of that sort. We've met all of those benchmarks now. There's nothing further that we're aware of that would entice local volunteers any further, and we're going to continue to just work on recruitment and retention. We'll move into some operational budget line increases. I have this structure so that we shift from operational increases. I'll address any questions on the operational lines after that time, then we can shift into capital. So operational budget line increases that I proposed for this next year is $20,000 in vehicle maintenance. The average age of our fire engine is about 19.7 years. Again, we have an overall aging fleet, increased cost for parts. We're looking to constantly maintain 7 engines, 2 ladders, admin vehicles, and support vehicles, whether it be the CERT bus, whether it be some off-road vehicles we have, training engine, and so forth. Remember that maintenance is in accordance with NFPA 1911. The bid for vehicle maintenance was recently put out this past calendar year. It was awarded again to a local vendor, but we competitively price maintenance for apparatus repair. This is just something that, as our apparatus continues to age, we need to make sure that we have the ability to repair apparatus as fast as possible and get it back on the road. Requested $20,000 in equipment and supplies for civil defense. I'd like you for a moment to just separate in your minds this line from the fire department. Again, this is a line that falls under the fire department, but this is truly a separate department. When it comes to civil defense, and that's how it's been working in a budget now for decades, this is really emergency operations. This is a vulnerability the town has had for a long period of time. Again, I sit here before you today operating out of the Emergency Operations Center that we have here in town now. It's allowed us to seamlessly manage disasters in town and to plan accordingly for such disasters. If you notice during this last couple of storms that we've had, when we had power outages throughout town, we've had this EOC staffed with representatives, leadership representatives from each department in town, and we're able to work collaboratively together to address emergencies that were taking place in town and to restore power faster than perhaps ever before. there's a cost attributed to some of those. And what we're looking to do is continue to expand upon the capabilities of the Emergency Operations Center. Many towns around us have an EOC, and some of the things that we're looking to do is regarding technology, some integration of software with our dispatching software, with software that we can have in Apparatus, some dispatch hardening. So one of the things that we have the ability to do here in the EOC is if something bad were to happen right now in the police station where our dispatchers are sitting, we could be able to immediately bridge that over to the EOC and start operating out of here as a backup dispatch center. It's really important to have. You think about, let's say, an imminent threat to the police station. You think about the smell of gas or perhaps a fire. We had a smell of smoke in dispatch center only within the last few weeks. And immediately on the way to the scene, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, what are we going to do to make sure that our 911 calls are still answered? And more importantly, we have means to transfer those over, but how are we going to respond to those? So there's some hardening we need to do in dispatch and in the Emergency Operations Center to make that transition better. One of the things we need to make sure we have here is uninterrupted power supply. This facility is on a generator, but obviously there's a lag time between the time that you would lose power and the time that the generator would kick in. If the EOC was already staffed and we're already functioning, and we were to lose power, we now lose all connectivity and we lost all the work that we're working on until the generator gets going again, the internet gets going again, and so forth. So there's some power supply issues we need to work on here as well. But this is a new line. I mean, it exists now, but this is very much new in terms of what we're looking to do. This line has always been a $12,000 line. It allowed us to do the very bare minimum. I'm looking to have this line increase now so we can begin to further enhance the emergency operations. Regarding equipment, this line, looking to increase it by $20,000. Again, this directly impacts replacement of fire hose, PPE, and other equipment that we have in the fire department budget. I referenced this 2 years ago that we had a company come in, independent company, test our hoses, and a number of our fire hose failed. This line was increased 2 fiscal years ago to be able to make sure that we had funding in place to constantly be able to replace fire hose and firefighter PPE as we move forward. This line was reduced last year. I'm looking to bring it back and to move forward with our replacement plan as we've identified. Something to keep in mind is that fire hose was in capital year request last 3 out of 4 fiscal years. We're trying to remove that ongoing capital need and allow us to be able to ongoing purchase hose so that we can eliminate the need for capital purchases moving forward. And it also helps because now you constantly have new equipment coming in. It's not like you're going to have a whole bunch of the same equipment that you have to replace at any given time. These things all have shelf lives and operational lives associated with them. Again, part of that line is the purchase of firefighter gear and equipment. I have on your screen now basically how much it costs for firefighter PPE. Now what you see here is in the first line that there's efforts being taken to secure a second set of PPE for all firefighters. That may sound like a lot, but here's what it comes down to is there's a lot of studies taking place right now that are showing the cancer increase in firefighters and the fact that cancer is so prevalent, particularly certain types of cancer, very aggressive forms of cancer. And it is a nationwide initiative right now to ensure that firefighters have a second set of gear, PPE, the thought being when you get back from any fire, doesn't matter if it's a house fire, dumpster fire, car fire, that you can take the PPE you just wore and immediately get it washed in your station. We have washers and dryers specific for the washing of this type of gear, but in that period of time, in those few hours being washed, you need to have something else able to be able to wear to go to further incidents that are taking place in the course of your shift. So part of that equipment line increase is the ability to be able to continue to replace PPE as it wears and to be able to start working towards trying to provide career firefighters with second sets of PPE and active volunteers with second sets of PPE as well. Another operational line increase is training. Looking to increase that by $16,000. This line has not been increased at all. I go back to even in fiscal year 14-15, that line has remained at its current state. I'm looking to increase that. The training is becoming more and more expensive for firefighters. Firefighters we have to send to recruit school, whether it be in a nearby city or whether it be at Connecticut Fire Academy, cost somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 per candidate. So as you can imagine, as we begin to hire more firefighters, as we begin to replace career firefighters that are retiring, when I need to send even 2 or 3 candidates to the Fire Academy at any given time, that absorbs a lot of the existing training line. There's also volunteers that we're looking to make sure that have the ability, again, think back to those numbers I showed you, and those were probationary members. All those members are attending those initial firefighter training classes, and there's an expense associated with every one of those. Moving forward, looking to close out with the expansion of the engine at Monteluise and allowing us to hire 2 career firefighters, again, hired mid-fiscal year. And current funding allows for 3 of the 4 shifts to be staffed with 10 firefighters. This increase would allow all 4 shifts to be staffed with 10 career firefighters. It allows for the second engine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and allows for the second paramedic 24 hours, 7 days a week. And I think that's making a big difference, and I'm going to show you some numbers here in a few minutes to kind of discuss that further, because I've been asked before for measurable data in terms of how that engine at Monteluise is making an impact to the community. And we haven't been able to really dig into that too much because of the lag in the hiring and being able to have data reliable enough to match up against it. But we started to look at some of the measurable data, and it's I'm quite impressed with some of the numbers that we ran. When you look at 2019, our average response time for fire and EMS incidents, all fire and EMS incidents, was 9 minutes, 25 seconds, and 53 seconds. That's not meeting any of the national benchmarks at all. When I ran the numbers for 2020, quite different. And that's with Engine 9 staffed only 50% of the time. So imagine what those numbers would be, how much more it would have gone down when Engine 9 is staffed now 24/7. That is a measurable difference in terms of our response times to all incidents in the town of North Haven. Remember that in 2019, when most of the apparatus at all times were responding from headquarters, we had travel distance times of 12, 14 minutes at times. So of course it's going to drive that average number up. With Engine 9 being staffed now, even 50% of the time, we're already seeing a big difference in our average response time for fire and EMS incidents. But behind every set of numbers, it doesn't really do a good job of depicting the picture of what this really is, because behind every one of these numbers that we talk about for EMS incidents, for fire incidents, it's a real emergency. And I think that until you really identify with some of the emergencies that are taking place, you don't necessarily build an appreciation for what this really means for the taxpayers. So really in just the last few months, I mean, it's, again, going in and having to pick this data out takes quite a bit of time. But there's a period of time in the last few months here in 2020 when we saw the difference that this engine at Monteluise is making. At this point, I'm going to talk about just medical calls. October 26th, there was a 76-year-old male that went into cardiac arrest at Monteluise Healthcare, and Engine 9 was on scene within 2 minutes. That individual is alive today with full neurological function and is discharged from the hospital. On December 2nd, a 46-year-old male on North Frontage Road suffered a cardiac arrest. Engine 9 was on scene, again, in less than 2 minutes. That individual has since returned full neurological function and was discharged to Gaylord from Yale New Haven Hospital for rehab most recently. He's alive today because of the on-scene time of Engine 9, the paramedic, and the ability to provide CPR in a timely manner. And again, December 7th, another incident at Model East Healthcare, arrival time of just under 4 minutes. And that individual is alive today with full neurological function. It's really easy for us to attribute to every one of these medical calls just looking at it as a call. But these are truly people's lives. These are truly people that are making a difference in each and every day. It's not just the fires. It's not just the medical call, it's also the fires. So again, having to go through and identify the calls that Engine 9 went on, I grabbed about a 6-month period to look at the calls that I know that Engine 9 made a difference with, that engine staff with a driver, a lieutenant, and a paramedic out of Monterey Station. There was a fire at Mossberg on February 15th, and that second engine that we have staffed now arrived at Mossberg and was able to put a second line in place to attack a fire within the building. And it arrived on scene 7 minutes before the next engine would have, the next volunteer engine. 7 minutes is a long time when we're talking about fire. And that engine to be able to arrive, we can't think of fires as just one engine has to go. Multiple engines need to arrive on scene for that fire to be extinguished to avoid further property damage and risk of life. And that engine arriving on scene at Mossberg, which is a big taxpayer in town and a big employer in town, was able to get that second line in place and keep that fire from extending any further. On March 5th, there's a fire within Covidian. Covidian's our second highest taxpayer, our second highest grand list contributor. Engine 9 arrived on scene within 2.5 minutes versus headquarters, which arrived on scene in 10 minutes. And there was a fire within a building inside of machinery, extending into the walls. On March 8th, Lexington Gardens, that's the cluster of housing on Middletown Avenue where the houses are very close to each other. There was a fire within a house there. Engine 9 arrived on scene within 5 minutes. Stillman Road fire, again, in the commercial building. Engine 9 arrived on scene 5 minutes before the next volunteer engine would have normally. Horseshoe Hill Road, again, another fire. This is the only fires that this engine has responded to for a short period of time. I picked 6 months. Electrical fire in a residence on Horseshoe Hill Road. The engine out of Monterey East, Engine 9 arrived in 5 minutes. The engine out of headquarters, Engine 1, arrived in 10 minutes. Made a big difference in the outcome of that. Briarwood Apartments, we all know the apartment complex, one of the two on State Street, large apartment complex. Engine 1 arrived on scene in 3 minutes, obviously it's closer to headquarters. Engine 9 arrived on scene in 7 minutes, and again, was able to get that second line in operation, keep the fire from going to other apartments in the complex. And again, it arrived 5 minutes before the next volunteer engine. But that's not it. And if I have to show more, I certainly can. But I went through to July. MacArthur Road, home right down the street from Monterey Station, cooking fire in a residence. The engine arrived on scene in 2 minutes. Allendale Drive, fully involved house fire. The engine arrived on scene in 7 minutes, 8 minutes before the volunteer engine would have. Spring Road, another fire in a residence. The engine from Model East arrived on scene in 5 minutes. Again, I keep showing this because it's showing how much faster this engine is allowed to provide service for fire and EMS to our residents on the south end of town. Middletown Avenue was a commercial building fire. Engine 9 arrived on scene in 5 minutes versus the engine out of headquarters at 9 minutes. Another fire at Covidian. You can see the engine arrived on scene 5 minutes, headquarters 10 minutes. And this was not in the Monterey East area, but I grabbed it because it was unique in that United Drive manufacturing fire. Engine 1 was not able to respond. The same thing I've been saying for years, that I'm concerned with the headquarters engine being tied up and not being able to respond. And Engine 9 was the only engine able to respond to that fire. So I can certainly show more, but I think a 6-month period and grabbing some of the incidents I know Engine 9 made a difference on, I don't know that I need to go into any more detail. That's what I have for operational increases. Mr. Chairman, if any questions regarding operational increase, I'd be happy to address them, or I can move forward with capital requests.
Chief, why don't we do the capital and then we'll be able to cover everything at one time.
Very good.
Thank you.
So fiscal year 21-22 capital request, broken it down, should coincide with your 5-year capital plan sheet that you have in hand. Administrative vehicle, we've asked for every single year. The apparatus purchase I'm going to cover, it's going to be 2 apparatus. And then I have asterisk 2 capital request lines that are ongoing obligations that will be expiring this year. So I've asked every year for administrative vehicles. Every year it's been denied. I need the Board of Finance to realize that the fire department doesn't just drive fire and ladder trucks around. There's an administrative component to the fire department. There are obviously admin functions that take place, fire inspections, fire investigations. There's training that staff needs to go to. There's fire prevention that takes place on a regular basis. We need to make sure that we have vehicles in place. There are no spare vehicles within the fire department. One of the active vehicles that we have is a retired police car, the 2011 Crown Victoria. It now has 118,000 miles on it. It's not reliable, and I have no other spare admin vehicles. Each of the 3 chiefs in this department are on call at various times. We need to be able to respond to incidents that are of a higher priority, and you, as taxpayers, want us to respond to those incidents so we can manage that scene effectively. In order to do so, we need to have admin vehicles at our disposal to be able to respond to those scenes. Those admin vehicles break down, they have maintenance issues and everything else, like any one of our vehicles we drive every day. The current age of our apparatus, I've shown this in the past. I want to just reference it again. This is for the engines only at this point. The engines are my focus with the capital at this point in time. So I've circled for you the 3 engines that are aging. I tried now for 3 years for a FEMA AFG grant to replace the now 34-year-old engine. We have not had any success in getting a grant for that engine. I'm considering trying again for a 4th year. I spoke with a representative from FEMA most recently by email this past week, and he's encouraging us to put in for it again, but we're at 3 years now, and we haven't been awarded it yet. We can't continue to plan as if we're going to get a FEMA grant award for an engine. Because in the meantime, I have these engines that are 21, 27, and 34 years old that are presenting some significant challenges to the fire department. You can see that I've placed on here, as I have in the past, the overall age of each of the engines and the duration of purchase between each individual engine. This is not necessarily anybody's fault on the Board of Finance, as you sit here today, but we've gone 6 to 8 years before without buying engines. We need to work aggressively to replace the older engines in this budget because it's presenting some significant challenges to us, both in terms of maintenance costs and operations. So what I proposed is replacement plan. Initially, for this next fiscal year, I've asked for $120,000. It would cover the down deposit for the purchase of 2 fire engines. For the next 5 fiscal years, there would be a $300,000 annual recurring payment. We've structured this the same way with the ladder truck. We've structured this the same way with the purchase of the SCBAs, the self-contained breathing apparatus. So this isn't a new concept to the Board of Finance or the town at all. We've done this in the past, and I'm looking to move forward with this for the purchase of 2 engines. The average cost of a fire engine is between $600,000 and $800,000. The intent with this is that we're going to look to decrease the operational downtime that we have. When these apparatus go out of service, they're often out of service for several weeks at a time. It is very hard to find parts to repair engines that are 30 years old. I'm looking to decrease the future apparatus repair costs and know that this will immediately replace 2 of the oldest apparatus, the bottom 2 of those that I had circled. Now, when I say immediately, we have to know that there's a lag time in the building of this. So immediately for us is 14 to 16 months. Approval of this will allow us to place the order on or about the time the budget passes and begin production of 2 engines, which will be delivered 14 to 16 months from then. What I'm hopeful that this does is this eliminates the need for future emergency expenditures of fire engines. I think it's important that we plan ahead and that we know that we have engines that are nearing the end of their life. We've worked hard in the past to try to repair and replace these. We've worked on a bonding package that was not approved. We've done a lot to try to identify that these are apparatus that are failing us. We need to have a plan to replace them. The cost of fire apparatus increases annually at 4%. So for every year that we put this off, we're figuring out a 4%, about $30,000, when you look at the cost of an engine. So when I do some quick math, allowing us to purchase $120,000, putting that down deposit now this next fiscal year, allows us to make that purchase, much as we've done in the past with the way we structured our leases. We save money because we're able to make that purchase and avoid inflation. I save the town tens of thousands of dollars purchasing the SCBA's that way. We did something very similar to the ladder truck, the tower. So for $30,000 increase a year, I think it's imperative that this at least be considered by the Board of Finance, and we can work hard to make sure that we have a replacement plan in place for our engines. Our apparatus expenses look like this. So these are the engines that are currently in service, and the apparatus, most of it, which is currently in service for the North Haven Fire Department. You can see that the cost to repair apparatus on an annual basis becomes quite costly as the engine ages. What I think is important to note is that the one engine that we replaced 2 fiscal years ago was approved. We took delivery of it last year. Allowed me to sell an older engine and allowed us to start to shift some of the maintenance costs. Last fiscal year, when I showed you this, the total was almost $600,000. You can see it at the bottom of your screen. This year, when I run the numbers for the apparatus that we currently have in our fleet, it's dropped significantly to $437,000. So I think it's very advantageous that we look at replacing these apparatus and continuing to further reduce our apparatus maintenance and repair costs and increase our operational effectiveness. Our capital request, this is our last year that we expect to ask for the $20,000 in station security. At this point, 3 of the 4 stations have funding in place to allow for CCTV monitoring and access control. We've integrated that with headquarters. We do have a history of car vandalism and break-ins at some of the firehouses. And we did have some recent criminal activity at one of the stations in which that station did have cameras in place, and it did serve as a vital piece of us being able to investigate that further. So again, $20,000, and we should be able to finalize with the 4th station to bring in that technology online. Future budget impacts. And I apologize, I probably should have put this slide up a little bit. Going back quickly to the capital, one of the things to look at when you look at the 5-year capital plan is look at what's going to be dropping off. So I made reference to the SCBA lease and the ladder truck lease, both being our last year that we need to make those recurring payments. So we have an $80,000 obligation in SCBA lease, then a $211,000 obligation in a ladder truck lease, and this is our last fiscal year coming up in which we have to make those payments. Going back to the apparatus replacement plan that we identified for you, we can shift the $291,000 that we've been paying towards these 2 items now for the last 5 years. We can shift that to the $300,000 recurring payment for the 2 engines. Further capital requests, the generators, again, all 3 stations, outlying stations, now have standby generators in place. The last generator that I need to replace is a generator at headquarters. It's 25 years old. It's been there for a long time, and it's a 50 kVA generator. We've had an electrical engineer in place who has identified that we need to have an 80 kVA generator in place, and we need to convert to natural gas. That's an option that we're taking electively so that we can, again, it goes back to hardening so that during the event of disasters and so forth and natural weather emergencies that we can, we're not relying on diesel fuel. One of the things I'll provide to the Board of Finance is a quote that I have that puts the replacement of the generator at $59,000. It does not include the gas company connection and meter conversion. I've estimated that to be $5,000, and I factored in our 10% in any unforeseen circumstances, which brings that budget request to $69,900, put it in for $70,000. I will have that quote included in the paperwork that I provide to the finance director so that he can provide it to you for you to look at. Please note that that budget pricing is based on Connecticut state contract pricing. How do I see the future moving forward? I do anticipate the EMS revenue line is going to stabilize. I see it probably increasing moving forward. We know now that we have control over the ambulance response to the town of North Haven. We have some control over the paramedic staffing by the ambulance company. We can better forecast for you the EMS billing that's going to take place. You'll notice that in the income projections, we've increased the income projections for the EMS line to, I believe, $90,000. Apparatus replacement line needs to take place. That plan that I've identified needs to take place so we can minimize operational issues. Again, I can't say enough how much this is going to impact our operations. I identified last year that we had come close on a couple of occasions of having an outlying station with no fire apparatus in it. Not much has changed since I last said that last year. We received one new engine. We need to work aggressively to replace those aging apparatus. Again, some fire station hardening we need to look at. We're going to continue to monitor call volume, where it's occurring, and the type of calls that are occurring. We're going to keep watching economic growth trends. We're going to work hard to retain the volunteer firefighters that we have. And that's what I have.
Thank you, Chief. Before we start, Ed, one question. The SCBA's don't appear to be on. Did we finish on these? Or did we have one more year? It's not on our capital sheet.
It's on page 38. Oh, sorry, it's not there.
No, it's not there. It's not there for 21-20 year. Chief, are you sure we didn't finish the lease for the SCBA's?
Yeah, I checked with finance going into this, and I don't believe that we did, but we can certainly check.
It sounds like Ed bought the lease out early.
Well, what happened was I think they were damaged during, an incident in town, and we could either pay it through or settle it. I think we just settled it
That's
from the insurance, yeah. Yeah, I
All
think that's what happened.
Thank you. Mr. Hallahan, you're first.
Okay, just ask a few of my questions at this time and we can rotate. The FEMA grant just announced, I guess Rosa DeLaura put a press release out on that, I believe, in January. Does that have any impact or effect on any of the capital requirements in the next year or in the 5-year plan?
No, sir, it doesn't. That grant was written specifically to purchase about 45, what they call, they're basically respiratory devices that allow us to wear those instead of having to wear the surgical masks or the higher end particulate filter masks that are being in such high demand right now for COVID. So that grant is specific for the purchase of respirators that will allow us to enter into incidents with suspected COVID. And then when we're done with COVID, which I hope is going to be soon, other type incidents where our firefighters are protected and don't have to wear any other kind of mask, whether it be N95 masks or anything else.
Are they, Michael, are they half face or full face respirators?
They're full face.
Okay.
They're full face packers. Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, if anyone else wants to piggyback on something rather
No, no.
than bouncing it, it's all right. Okay, over to dispatch. Thanks in part to the fine work by the chairman here and someone else, the workshop recommended many changes to dispatch, including expansion of the amount of people that that we're gonna need for years to come, since so much is being internalized. I'm sure there's more training involved, and especially with all the GPS tracking and the priority classifications that occur with medical calls. Are you happy so far with the transition that's been occurring over at dispatch?
Yeah, and I do. I appreciate again the opportunities for those workshops that we had at a subcommittee level. I recall specifically a conversation that I had where we walked you through it. I remember that you wanted to know the evolution of a 911 call. You wanted to know from the start that it comes in until the time that we go to scene. You want to know everything that took place. And I remember having that conversation with you and some others about how that 911 call was received and some of the issues that took place when it was received, and how stretched thin that one person was, and sometimes two, to be able to answer that call as well as everything else taking place. And yes, I will say with confidence that it has been a marked improvement. I think that moving forward, we may need, one of the things that we have not addressed yet are the overnight hours. I think that the police chief and I are going to continue to monitor the overnight hours to determine if that's something that we need to expand upon. Right now, that staffing during the twilight hours is minimal, but at all other hours of the day, 7 days a week, yes, the dispatching capability is night and day compared to what it was.
Yes, the deficiencies were so critical. I immediately went home on Indeed and tried to find you people to fill those empty slots. But it was,
Sure.
Come on, time.
yeah. Well, in the meantime here, over on the personnel side, within our budget for full-time, we have on page 42, under the firefighters grade A, the increase there is 9.5%. So Ed may be able to answer this. Is that inclusive of the two new individuals that are being requested for the department?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. Okay, then the number of firefighters over on the left-hand side should have been 30 to 32. No? Is it going from 30 to 32 or not?
Because some of them were moved up. They moved up in rank.
Yeah. Well, we already have 8. There's 4 and 4 under captains and lieutenants.
Maybe it's 32 to 34.
32 to 34, I think it is.
Even though it's half.
No, so in the future, these shifts are gonna have 10 per shift. So.
Yes.
So that would be 40.
Correct.
Okay, so right now we have 38.
We have 38 that we don't, but we're going to be hiring the 2 in the next couple of weeks because it was a mid-fiscal year addition. So maybe that's what the numbers don't cover yet.
So the 2 we're hiring, has it going from 36 to 38 or 38 to 40?
36 to 38.
36 to 38, starting at the beginning of the fiscal year, and then mid-year, we start the process for going from 38 to 40.
Correct.
Okay, I get it, a little confusing to the public, but I get it. Because of these mid-year hires, we always budget for 2 more full-time people in that line to cover these, the 2 people that have been approved in the year before, and the 2 people who are being added mid-year. Because.
Correct.
Right, because the two people who were hired in the year before were already half budgeted in the year before. And since we're just carrying that number forward, they're already half budgeted in the current year. So they're getting their second half plus the first half of the two new people.
That's exactly,
Yes.
that's right.
Yes.
Is there a question?
Yeah, exactly.
Is there a question
I just thought,
Yeah.
no, but I think for transparency, we've got to explain that to the public.
No, but you're absolutely right. That's the way it works, okay, so.
Thank you. Okay, two halves make a whole. Good, so the firefighters contract right now, what was the term of the contract and what year are we in?
It'll expire next year,
It'll expire,
2022.
it'll expire at the end of 21-22. Okay, so we're in year,
Correct.
we're entering year 3 of a 3-year contract?
I believe there was an extension with the contract recently, and I believe that we're gonna be operating off the extension from July 1st of 2021 until June 30th, 2022, which is why it'll expire in 2022. And we had to make those additions to elevate some firefighters to the rank of lieutenant. There was an extension associated to the contract.
Okay. I understand. So the shifts remain the same, that is, you go, instead of first, second, and third, you use shifts A, B, C, and D, right? And each shift is still 24 hours on, 3 days off?
Correct.
Okay. Now, going up to 40 firefighters here, aside from administrators, what is the goal? I mean, the year after that, are you going to request 2 more, or are you going to be fine for a while at 10 per shift?
So I think if you go back to what I've shown the last couple of years, one of the things that we need to continue to take a look at is the ability to take the shift commander, and as the captain on the shift, we need the ability to take that shift commander who's riding currently in Engine 1 out of headquarters and mobilize him. So I've identified that for the last couple of years as a need that we need to look at, and it's something that if I can find the data to support it in such a way that I know I can make, in my opinion, a good argument, a great argument for it, you'll see me perhaps next year making that sound argument. I'm also going to wait to make sure that I have enough data put aside to be able to do so.
Okay. All right. We'll take it 1 year at a time. The volunteers. Thank you very much for the breakdown on the volunteers per firehouse. But what was the change in the last year or 2 years? I mean, we're at 14 at Ridge, 7 Mono East, and 12 at Northeast. What were the numbers a couple years ago? Did we lose people? Is it stabilizing?
Sure, you asked that same question last year as well, so I was ready for you this year. So in fiscal year 2021, we had 14 at West Ridge, 3 probation, 11 at Mono East, 7 probation, 13 at Northeast with 1 probation. The year before that really wasn't much different. The year before that, it's easier if I go by qualified, or by roster. So in fiscal year 18-19, we had 51, fiscal year 19-20, 46, and fiscal year 2021, 49. You will see a bit of a decrease this year, and it's predominantly on the probationary side, and also we've hired some of the volunteer firefighters that we've had into our career ranks. So that's made an impact on the number of volunteer firefighters. But at the same time, I had 3 applications for volunteer firefighter for the entire calendar year 2020. 3. I don't like to keep referencing COVID, but it has had an impact on volunteer firefighters. It has, at least in this last calendar year, we had 3 applications only. So as we begin to move forward out of the COVID environment that we're in, I think that's going to continue to get back to what it was in the fiscal years prior.
Okay, well, I'm happy to hear about these solid moves you're making on retention and recruitment for volunteers. So, and I believe that there's an upcoming town meeting for the changes in the pension plan. Is that right, Mr. Frieda?
Correct. There is.
Yes, we spent a lot of time on that, the chief and I, with the leadership of the volunteers, and so that'll come later this month.
Okay.
You done, Michael?
That is all at the present time. I wish for a second round later on.
Mr. Dunny, Tim?
Morning, Chief. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Just a couple questions, please. So you've got the vehicle maintenance line going up 20,000, but on the other hand, you showed us a slide, the one that listed all the engines and the vehicle maintenance, which actually went down. So could you just reconcile that for me, please?
Yeah, sure. So the slide that I showed you where it went down covered an extended fiscal year period. It covered from way back to the fiscal year, or the calendar year 2014. So when you look at it going down, yeah, it's trended down in the last 6 years. But again, that's in large part because of some of the apparatus, the one apparatus in large part, in some ways a second, the truck that we replaced, 2000 truck, and I believe it was a 1994 engine. So when you just take those two apparatus out of the equation alone, that's what drives that number down over a 6-year period. But as you can see, when you go back and you look at that 2020, there's some significant annual expenses associated with the older apparatus, and we need to make sure that we continue to repair that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I missed it, or maybe I saw, was there something in here about the fire training facility?
There's not, no. I was gonna cover that, next fiscal year. It's currently under development. It's being
Okay.
constructed as we speak now.
All right, I probably saw it in the 5-year capital plan then.
There's no cost for this fiscal year
Okay.
now.
All right. Just a question on the 2 new engines that you're looking for. So I saw there's a very long lead time. I mean, we wouldn't get them for almost 18 months, I think is what I saw in your presentation. The $120,000, is that the minimum down payment required? What are the actual contractual terms if we were to go ahead with that purchase?
Sure, so I will be able to provide the proposal and let you see what the terms are. We have the ability to finance this through the apparatus manufacturer themselves, or as Zukowski did with the purchase, the lease of the ladder truck. We went through our own leasing partner and was able to secure a better rate with better terms.
I'm not really asking about,
$120,000 pretty much gets us in the door, allows us to make that purchase, make the order with some money behind it to know that we're not gonna walk away from the creation of 2 apparatus from the ground up.
I'm not really asking about the long-term financing or how this board might pay for the engine. I'm just asking if we contract with the vendor here, what's the typical upfront down payment required? What's the minimum? Let's put it that way. That should be the question.
This seems to be the minimum. I think it depends on how we structure it. I've got a structure right now with 120 so that the remaining 5 payments come in at like, I want to say 298. So just at that $300,000 mark. But we can make it whatever we'd like. It just makes that annual contribution more or less.
Ed, am I asking the wrong question? What's the?
I think it's, with first year's payment, they have the first down payment. So it's a 5-year lease, 1/5.
But we're not leasing it just yet. We're not getting this in the door for 18 months. So my question here is, do we have to put out $120,000 in the next fiscal year?
I think once you place the order, we have to put something down on it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
assuming we do.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, Tim's right. It's really a down payment to lock it in to get the process
Right.
started, subject to the budget approval, and then it kicks in on July 1st. And then that 14-month period Paul was talking about, that's the process of us getting it. So it's a table setter to book it, to get it moving, and we needed that amount we determined to put in there to lock it in.
So technically, at the end of the first year, you've already incurred 40% of the cost. You only had the engine for a year.
See, Paul, now, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that when we decided to do this,
So you're paying 20% the first year.
so when we decided to do this, and this may help answer Tim's question also, We had to put it in the workshop session process to get it approved by July 1st. Because if it wasn't approved in the budget by July 1st, we'd have to wait another year to
Right.
put the money in as a table setter.
Yep.
So that's kind of why we're doing it now.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Just to be clear, what's the overall bottom line cost? We're saying that the engine is costing
Gotta be 600.
$600,000.
It's 2 engines.
Or $300,000 an engine. No, $600,000.
I believe it came out to just under $700,000 per engine.
Right, so 1.4.
And you're including fitting that out completely as well, because that's what you've been doing the last few years. You're fitting it out.
I'm sorry, Rich, I couldn't hear you.
You're fitting it out with equipment too.
Correct,
Yeah,
it comes with a minimal amount of equipment to just make sure that it's NFPA approved to operate as an engine. It doesn't come with very much.
Yeah, but weren't you in the last two engines, weren't you equipping them out to what you wanted in every compartment so that you weren't taking it off the old engine? And you were
We
using
were,
spares?
for ladders, things like that are customized specific to that apparatus, yes, again, there's some equipment that goes on it, but it's really not a lot.
So you're not fitting it out 100%, you're using some of your old equipment?
Correct, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, Tim, you can keep going.
No, that's quite all right.
Diane?
That's fine. Go ahead, Diane.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Done? A couple questions. So when you were talking about the downtime for the engines, do we currently have any that are down today?
Present day, we have, the ladder truck only, the second ladder truck that's out of service. That just happens to be, what it is. Again, but every day it changes. There's some days that we lose 2 or 3 at the same time. But as we sit here today, just the second ladder truck's out of service. I have the annual preventive maintenance, being done to the ladder and to the chassis itself.
Okay, and this, I don't know that you're gonna be able to answer this, but it came up when you were doing your presentation. Do you think that a lot of these house fires or situations are increasing due to people being at home more? A lot of people are working at home. They're not really traveling outside of their town. Could that be a contributing factor to some of this?
That's a good thought.
Yeah, I'd have to run that and see kind of how it looks. I will say that the call volume trended down for a little while, particularly medical calls. And the advent of COVID, when it first started, a lot of people were putting off things that they probably shouldn't have, and we saw our call volume drop a little bit. It's since right back to what it was. In terms of fires, though, I don't necessarily see the fires having increased necessarily. We, despite what you don't see on the news, we regularly get between 25 good structure fires a year, where we have to put multiple engines on scene.
Well, I was thinking of the house fires. You referenced in your data that there were some like house fires or kitchen fires. So between that and, I mean, people, I work full-time at home, and if I run out to do an errand, I'm like, does nobody work around here? North Haven is like really busy in the middle of the day, and there seems to be a lot more traffic. So that question came to mind. I don't know if you would be able to pull anything on that, but I think if you could, it would be interesting to know.
Sure, I'll see if I can find anything that I can pull that would make sense.
Okay, I also noticed this emergency management line item and went way up. I'm assuming there's additional responsibilities with that, perhaps?
There are, so.
Paul, let me answer that. Paul, I'll
Yeah,
answer
go ahead,
that.
Mike, yeah.
So Diane, you're referring to the same discussion we had earlier, right? Okay,
Right.
So,
But I'm just asking for the details.
yeah. So, yeah, and this ties back to what I mentioned earlier about Paul before he joined us here. So he has taken on a considerable amount of responsibility in terms of civil defense, emergency management. He works closely with the health districts. He's tied in, like I am, with the state on the recovery committee. He's tied into and after this meeting, he's going to be joining me here with Valerie. We're establishing a vaccine distribution facility in town to help augment the supply through the healthcare system. So he's got a considerable amount of additional responsibilities that I've asked to put this stipend in. Now, it goes back to an earlier discussion also. That's a very important part of it, is additional responsibilities. But the other part of it, as I mentioned earlier, as it relates to Paul, we're trying to establish a level of parity with Ed, with Paul, and with the police chief in terms of salary parity. So instead of bumping the salaries up, the commensurate amount that I mentioned earlier with respect to the police chief, we're adding the stipends in, so the total compensation, including the base salary and the stipend, equals the top salary on the town side, which is roughly $132,000. But I can justify it by simply his additional responsibilities, but the parity piece was important to me too, for Ed and for Paul.
Okay, two more things. So when you were talking about the dispatching and when the Emergency Operations Center is open, so basically what you're saying is in the past, if dispatch went down, even before the upgrade of the system, when it went down, we were in like a blackout. And now that even we have all this technology, if it were to go down, there's no way to port that over to the center that you're at right now, correct?
Sure, so the way that it would happen in the past was the state requires that 911 calls be transferred over to another public safety answering point, often referred to as a PSAP. So as soon as the state 911 system realized that North Haven's phone lines are down, it would be transferred over to a nearby town, in this case, Camden. Camden would start taking our 911 calls, but then our dispatchers would have to start taking phone calls from the Hamden dispatcher. In other words, Hamden dispatcher answers the phone, realizes it's a North Haven call coming in now, will have to now take the call, process the call on the telephone back to our dispatchers, and there's a huge delay in being able to do that. In some ways, we're not going to always be able to get away from that, but some of the delays that would happen would also be associated with not being able to talk on the radios, not being able to dispatch the fire and police units correctly. So an external issue with dispatch, we may still be looking at that. My concern is the internal threat to the dispatch center, and the fact that, again, when we had that smell of smoke in the dispatch center a couple of months ago, only 2 months ago probably now, if we had to evacuate dispatch, when our dispatchers leave, right, they have to get up and leave that facility. Now, even if our 911 calls get transferred, who are Hamden dispatchers going to call back and report incident to? Our dispatchers aren't even in the center any longer. So it's not only just hardening of the dispatch center, it's also I want you to think about in terms of when we had these tornadoes come through town, and I've dealt now with 3 of them. When these calls start coming into the 911 center constantly, and the dispatcher can barely keep up with the phone calls coming in, they just basically populate all of the calls for service into the dispatch screen. I need to have somebody in the Emergency Operations Center that can see all of that dispatch software and can be able to start deciphering which calls are the priority to send units to. And so this is really, some of the technology that I referenced in my workshop is really to be able to harden our ability to answer the multitude of calls that come in during blizzards and during tornadoes and during other weather emergencies. It's not just a failure of the dispatch center itself. There are some pretty good systems in place. It's the redundancy so that we can answer disasters a little better.
So do we have documented, I'm going to call them disaster recovery because that's what we call them in the IT world. Do we have those documented like for what we have now? Because the concern I have in hearing this, it is concerning, and with all the natural disasters and relying on Hamden, and now you're making phone calls, there's a lot of time that you're losing. So I was wondering if you had like your documented disaster plans and like some metrics on timing, because this is concerning to hear if something like what you're saying, you know, the smoke in the dispatch center or something happens.
Yeah, we have plans in place, and that's one of the things that I've worked very hard to try to harden is our emergency operations capacity. When I first became a firefighter here in a town, there is a small bifold closet on the second floor of Town Hall with some radios and a telephone inside, and that was our emergency operations center with one chair in front of it. We then progressed into a conference room at the firehouse, a small classroom, but it didn't have necessarily network capability, didn't have ports for different telephones, didn't have the infrastructure in place to be able to house people for any length of time. We've worked hard to exactly as you're saying, to have plans in place now to be able to respond to these different needs as they come up, and one of which is a dispatch. So as I sit here before you today, I'm staring off into the corner of the Emergency Operations Center where I can see a dispatch console that if something were to happen right now, a dispatcher, or we call one in perhaps as well, we had to call an additional in, would come here, plug in, and be able to have the same functionality as a dispatcher sitting across the street on Lindsay Street.
So what's like an average length of time in the scenario if that happened today? Do you have any idea?
I do not know, no.
Okay, all right, I'm just curious that at least we have plans, but there's a lot of risk there. And then I have one question, because this is my opportunity, and we could also take it offline, which is something that Nancy and I always ask about on the revenue side, and I don't want to get in, maybe this is the place for the details, maybe it's someplace else, but the paramedic service line, we always look at that and what was projected and what we're seeing in revenue. And we had asked at a couple times at the meetings if you had some data to support, and I don't want to get again into the details of billing, and we're not saying that, you know, you're going to go after people if they can't afford it, but just your thoughts on that. And I want to throw that out there, and maybe that's something that we could talk about in the future, not necessarily for this. Just wanted to bring it to your attention, Paul.
I'm happy to answer it at a high level, without getting into too much detail, because again, we really just made this conversion in mid-October. So we're a little early to be talking about numbers that I can necessarily provide to you. I can tell you this: if I look at between January and September, I can tell you that at that period of time, we had not yet been awarded the PSA. We are still being serviced by AMR. We are still being flooded with paramedics from AMR. And our ability to assist into the hospital was no more than 10 and no less than 4. So figure between 4 and 10 per month. Since that time that we made that PSA conversion, and we have all of those positives we talked about in other meetings, and I won't go into it right now, but so many positives associated with having a different provider answering our 911 calls now from the ambulance perspective. We have seen our ALS assist increase, and we expected them to. These last couple of years, as I've been saying over and over again, they were false. They were a misrepresentation of what was truly going to happen. And because of that, our EMS billing suffered. I can tell you that in October, November, and December, the amount of times that our staff assisted to the hospital was anywhere from the teens to the mid-20s. So naturally, with that, you're going to start to see that revenue line go back to what we had always projected it would be, because now we have much more control over the ambulance response, and we don't have a company any longer that's trying to take advantage of the numbers.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Dan,
I'm
you have anything
done.
else?
I'm done.
Jim?
Hi, Chief. Jim Leonis here. Just want to ask you a few questions.
Good morning, sir.
Getting back to the Emergency Operations Center, just want to know one thing. Is this tied into the police at all?
It is. Yeah, so the Emergency Operations Center operates under a unified command. Again, as I say here before you, I'm staring at 8 terminals, 8 different phones and computers in which a different representative from each town agency would be sitting at, whether it be DPW, police, UI, and so forth, so that we can manage emergencies. And the police department is a big part of that.
So if you're saying to us that it goes down, that means the police have no communication either? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'm just asking, you mentioned if the system goes down, that means the police have no communication also?
So the system, again, I'm not looking to, address necessarily the system failure, because the system doesn't really go down. I mean, the phone lines are pretty hardened now. We have some copper lines on top of VoIP lines. It's, again, I'm trying to make sure that if something were to catastrophic happen within the building or the dispatch center itself, we have the means to be able to have some redundancy in place. And I'm also looking to make sure that we have the means to take on some of that burdened call volume. The dispatch center is subjected to some time-shared disasters. The software and everything else is just enhancements.
Okay, another thing, you said you had 60 some odd calls to Amazon and you had over 80 calls to the landing. What type of emergencies are you seeing at the landing? And when you go to the landing, do you take the fire apparatus with you, knowing that it's probably going to be medical?
So the landing is predominantly going to be medicals. I don't have the breakdown in terms of what the landing was. But yeah, whenever, again, going back to the way now that the apparatus is being dispatched, the appropriate resource is sent based on the call that's taking place, and that's then have to work in unison with not only the appropriate apparatus, but the next available apparatus. So yeah, at times you're going to see an engine or a truck going to that scene. Yeah, that's just what's available or what the unit is calling for.
Okay, the PPE, how many sets of clothing are 10 years or older right now?
I don't have that number before me.
I wouldn't think it's very high because we just replaced a bunch of it.
Well, because he's asking for.
Well, he's asking for a second set.
Okay. This is just for information only. You're mentioning the response time at Monowese is considerably shorter than if you had to go from the main campus. How does that compare to the Ridge Road response time?
Yeah, the Ridge Road, the Ridge Road area, we don't see the call volume as much as we see from the Monowese side, with it being predominantly residential. But we identified the biggest need. The biggest need at this point in time was the Monowese station with access to the highways and with some of the larger manufacturing down there, and then further travel distance. The travel distance to the Ridge Road school area is not, it's not terrible. It's the further ends of the outer Ridge Road area. Of course, there's some long travel distances there, but the call volume is less up there as well. So in a perfect world, I'd love to be able to improve that, but at this point in time, there's no plans to do so.
Okay, on your training, you happened to mention that you have anticipated retirements coming up. How many people do you plan on seeing retire?
Eligible to retire, I have 4 to 5. I anticipate a couple of retirements this next calendar year.
So the training would be needed, okay. Another question here is, we're increasing the shift quantity of personnel to 10 each. I noticed in your December report, your overtime was at 28%. So that's telling me that your overtime is going down. My reason for asking this, the state mandates 7 to 8, I'm not too sure how many people. So if somebody's sick, do you have to backfill that sick person because you're over the state requirement by having 10 people? Did you understand my question?
The minimum shift staffing is 10, when there's 10 on duty. It's the only thing that I can do to be able to staff the apparatus assigned to headquarters and the apparatus assigned to Monowese. I'm not able to go any less than that.
So you still have to backfill the person that's out sick to keep it at 10?
That's correct, yes.
I didn't know that.
Well, I think Jim's question is, what's the state mandate? Chief, I think we all are under the impression that it used to be 7 or 8. We weren't sure which it is, right? So I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah, so there's no longer a state minimum that pertains. We've since incorporated that into the collective bargaining agreement, and the collective bargaining agreement identifies a minimum number of staffing for apparatus, and it puts it at 10 when there's 10 on duty right now. There's no other town in the state of Connecticut that ever had a state minimum. The town of North Haven did because for years it was not able to reach consensus on what the staffing should be, so the state ruled in. There's no other town in the state that has that ruling. We're going back a number of years now, but
Right.
that's not something that we should really
All
reference
right,
anymore.
okay, wasn't aware of that.
Okay. Thank you.
And the last question I have, Chief, is if you do get the new equipment, or when you do get the new equipment, the apparatus, what do you do with the old apparatus? Do you sell it? Because if it's no good to us, we can't pass it on to another town.
So, yeah, my intention moving forward is to retain one of the older engines that I've identified as a training engine, and that's really because I want you to visualize that the training tower, or even not the training towers, any training taking place at all, when you start trying to pull the equipment off of it, pull hose off of it, that type of thing, that apparatus now is out of service. It can't respond to calls. So in the event that an incident comes in and that apparatus is needed, there's a very big delay to it responding to be able to pack all that hose and do what you have to do to get it back on the road. Or we can take an apparatus and shift it over into a training-only scenario, which is one of the things I intend to do with one of the 2 apparatus we're looking to replace. Traditionally, we've sold the apparatus, and we've got one right now that we're actively selling, and they don't go for very much, a few $1,000s. By the time that we get rid of apparatus, they're worth more in scrap. To give you some, again, perspective, the ladder truck that we purchased was, at the time, only 11 years old. So many departments get rid of apparatus when they're 10, 12 years old. We don't do that. So there's more value when it's 10, 12 years old, sure. But in this town, the way that we replace apparatus, there's minimal value by the time that we go to part with it.
Okay, great, thank you.
All set, Jim?
All set.
Nancy?
Good morning, Chief. This is Nancy Barrett. You may not be able to see me on camera there, but I just wanted to say good morning and Happy New Year to you. And I have a few.
Happy New Year, Nancy. I'm not able to see you, but good morning, and I hope you're well.
Thank you very much. So I have a few questions for you. I'm just going to follow the document that you provided all of us, and I'll skip over. I'll start with vehicle maintenance. So you had given us that sheet, the chart, and I'll have to study that in greater detail later. But I just wanted to ask you very generally, the engine that we purchased a while back that had to be purchased before you came on board, that was kind of a lemon that was constantly in the shop. Do we still have that, or was that one of the ones that was swapped out?
No, we still do have that.
We still have that. And is that functioning today, or is it still a problem in terms of maintenance?
It's functioning. It's now being utilized out of a volunteer station, one of our outlying stations. There was, believe it or not, at a nationwide conference I was at, I approached the vendors and the vendor of the apparatus, the vendor of the engine itself, the mechanical engine itself, and I really kind of pressed the issues that we were having, and that led to a series of correspondence thereafter in which they made right on it, and there was a significant repair done to it, and it has not had anywhere near the issues that it had at that time. So I'm at this point, it's one of the more reliable applications.
Wow, that's terrific news. Great, excellent. And also the newer engine that the town purchased for $750,000. Any problems with maintenance?
No, not at all.
Okay, and the most recent addition, the $300,000 used ladder truck. How has that been working for you? I believe you drove out to Ohio and picked that up yourself?
Yeah, I don't drive them anymore, but I did look at it in Ohio, and I said, yeah, that it will work for us, and we did. We put it into service sometime in this last calendar year, It's working out well.
Good.
2008, it meets the needs. Remember that we purchased that because an engine at that station at Northeast had failed its pump test, its annual testing. And I identified the need of a second ladder as well. And so there's cost saving measures that I thought we could take advantage of. But to date, that is doing well. Again, it's out of service only because of some annual maintenance being done to it, but it's otherwise reliable. And it also allows us that when these things require maintenance, they're very maintenance dependent. When our main ladder truck is out of service for maintenance out of headquarters, we're able to take this ladder truck and plug and play it into headquarters. The staff can use it, and we don't lose any functionality for fire suppression.
Right, right. And the $1.2 million ladder truck has also been operating well?
Yes.
Okay, so again, you know, if you're using the ladder trucks as well as the pumper engines to respond to EMS services, then there will be, you know, significant wear and tear on these big, very expensive vehicles. So moving on to equipment, supplies, and civil defense. Just out of curiosity, this is brand new to me. Where exactly is this emergency operations center, and how did we pay for this?
It's in the annex on Lindsley Street, and it was largely paid for by local capital improvement, LoCIP.
From LoCIP funds.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, terrific. And then moving along to contractual replacement and staffing, which I don't think was part of your presentation. Again, the increase or the proposed increase for this coming year is about $21,000, which percentage-wise is very small, but this particular department, or this particular line item, I should say, is encroaching on $1 million. And as we add additional staffing to the fire department, again, that will continue to grow. So you mentioned that this particular line item includes vacation, sick time, as well as workman's compensation, and that we receive reimbursement from the federal government for recovery of salaries for deployed military personnel. Do we currently have any deployed military that are part of our fire department?
Yes, we do.
We do. And how many?
At this time, deployed, only one.
Okay, so we do have one that's deployed. Okay. And of that $21,000, what percentage of that is actually due to vacations and sick time as excluding workman's compensation?
I just did a 2.5% increase to that line to compensate for wage increases.
So that 2% is primarily vacation and sick time, or it's a big chunk of it is?
It's all encompassing of the entire line, yeah.
So my question is, if you carved it out?
As the wage increases every fiscal year with contractual obligations, the lines that cover for overtime and things of that sort, contractual replacement staffing, need to go up and compensatory with the wages. We did that last year. Last year I had to play catch up a little bit and do a couple of years. So my goal moving forward is the gradual increase of this to stay in line with the salary increases.
Right, but that would not include workman's compensation, because that does not increase commensurate with salary increases.
No, the only point of saying workers' compensation is that when we do have an employee out on workers' compensation, there's a percentage return on the salary that's not reflected in my budget, that's reflected elsewhere in the town budget.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then regarding overtime, this is just a purely hypothetical question, but again, it occurred to me just because we now have these new 4 captains. Since there's only 4 of them, if one is out, either due to vacation or sick time, is it a requirement that they're replaced with one of the 3 other captains, or is there the possibility that they could be replaced by a lieutenant that, say, has taken some sort of standardized tests to make them qualified to do so?
Yeah, any officer can take overtime for each other. It starts
okay.
as it starts as looking for a captain first, and if a captain can't take it, a lieutenant takes it. I insisted in the collective bargaining agreement that a credentialed officer is on duty at all times. That no firefighter could act in an acting officer capacity without a credentialed officer being on duty, and that's for obvious reasons.
Sure, no, that's very helpful, so thank you for clarifying that. And I assume that's not true for a lieutenant. A lieutenant could not be replaced by a grade A firefighter because they're not considered officers?
In some cases, a grade A firefighter would be able to act as a lieutenant, and the lieutenant would act up in the capacity of a captain. But again, a credentialed officer, when I say credentialed officer, I'm referring to any of the 4 lieutenants or any of the 4 captains, needs to be on duty at any given time.
I see. And in those cases where they're replaced, they're compensated at the level of the officer plus, or how does that work? I see.
Yes.
I see. Okay. And then regarding your request for the 2 additional full-time firefighters, I'll ask the same question that I asked last year. What would you do differently if you did not get these 2 positions approved? Again, during a year in which we have basically a very, very small grand list increase. So I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. So at this point in time, if you're saying that there would be no further increases granted, then we would continue to run 3 shifts with 10 and 1 shift with 8. The engine that provides ALS and a second suppression engine to the Monteluce area would be staffed 3 out of 4 times, 3 out of 4 days.
And do you notice a big difference in that shift at Monteluce that is not able to be filled? So when you have those shifts with only, I don't know whether it's A, B, C, or D, that it only has 8 firefighters, do you notice a big difference statistically?
Sure, the days that we have the multiple calls taking place, and I don't have that engine in place at Monteluce, are the days that we start to, again, to be able to miss 911 calls or have significant delays to 911 calls. It also is the days that we have the furthest travel distance, again, back to the Monteluce area of town. So when the engine at Monteluce is not in service, it's creating a disparity from day to day. And it also impacts our operations. I mean, as it stands right now, it's very hard to write policy and to write regulations for what apparatus respond to where and what types of calls when at this point in time, as we sit here today, every 2 days it's changing. I mean, you can imagine how hard that would be for not only my staff, but for the dispatch staff. So we need to move forward to a point where we're staffing that engine 24/7. We're providing a consistent level of service to the Monteluce area of town, and we can begin to shift some policies and some assets responses where it's the same every single day.
Okay, and related to that, is engine 9 always staffed with a paramedic?
Yes.
It is. And are there any other engines that are every single shift staffed with a paramedic?
No, the only places when that shift when a shift has 10, the only places that are required to have a paramedic are the rescue out of headquarters and the engine out of Monteluce.
Okay, so the rescue always has a paramedic, and then engine 9.
Yes.
So during that shift in which Monteluce is not functioning, we are limited to just a single paramedic then, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then regarding, I think I remember last year at this point, you presented to us that it was your specific decision when we acquired the $750,000 pumper engine, and you were in the process of applying for the FEMA grant, that you chose not to replace the oldest vehicle in the fleet. And is that something that you're going to continue to do, or if we were to acquire additional fire trucks, or what would be your proposal?
Sure. So the oldest engine in the fleet was not the one that we parted with during this last calendar year. And I made reference in the past. Sometimes the oldest one in this case was in better shape than one of the ones that were only 27, 28 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The one that we decided to part with was so bad that when you sat in the cab of the engine, everything was shaking so hard you could barely see the mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one we decided to part with. Moving forward, again, I'm not optimistic at all about the FEMA AFG grants for apparatus. Over 60% of the grants that go in for such a limited amount of money is for apparatus alone throughout the country. And there are some rural areas in the country that are really hard pressed for fire apparatus. where I'm not confident in a grant at all. So I'm still looking at writing it, especially with some of the feedback that I received from a FEMA representative directly. I don't think we have anything to lose at this point, but I don't think we can plan around it. And if we are successful in replacing the two apparatus, it is still, from present day today, it's 18 months away. So a lot could change in the next 18 months. We could have a catastrophic failure of an engine itself or the pump, where it forces my hand to part with that apparatus. Well, over the next 18 months, we'll of course evaluate our fleet and we'll part with the ones that make the most sense. And it would likely be the oldest apparatus, yes. I just don't want to say with certainty because a lot could change in a year and a half.
Right. It just certainly influences the average age of the fleet if you keep replacing not the oldest one, but yet the second oldest or the third oldest. So that's why I asked that question. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and regarding the generator for headquarters that you say is 25 years old, wasn't that generator included in the $9.2 million renovation of headquarters?
So that predates my involvement as chief, so I wouldn't be able to answer that very accurately. I apologize.
Does anyone know that?
The answer is no, it wasn't, it was not,
It was not included.
it was not, no.
So $9.2 million to renovate not just headquarters, but the other 3 firehouses, and we did not replace,
That's right.
That's right. We, even Northeast.
or did we run out of money? There's a difference.
No, we didn't run out of
No, it was
money.
never
Northeast didn't even get one. I
It was
remember
never
that.
part of it. You gotta keep in mind, $9,247,000 for a main house like this, fully renovated, and the other houses to be renovated also, ended up to be a very inexpensive thing as it relates to what it could have been. So it was never included, the generator itself was never included. Now, we did have some problems that some of the volunteer houses fell short of some of the renovations, but through the efforts of the chief with the volunteers and the labor that some of the volunteers put in, we're able to get back up to where we needed to be on some of the volunteer houses. But the simple answer is, no, it was not included.
It was not included.
Right.
Interesting. I was always led to believe that it was.
Ed, was it?
No, it wasn't, right?
Okay.
The project
All right.
needed more money.
All right. Well, certainly, I mean, it's been a line item of over $100,000 for additional maintenance
Right.
every single year, ever since the original
Now, let me be
renovations.
also clear on something that.
Sure.
That this is going back many years now, okay?
Yeah.
So it was not installed as part of the $9,247,000. We'd have to look back in all the records going all those years ago to see if it was originally in the scope of the work and then taken out because the $9,247,000 was needed to renovate as many of the houses as we can. So that's what we'd have to look back.
Okay. So then the money that was set aside was for a list of services, and it might have included
We don't
the
know, we have to
generator.
check back.
And yet,
remember.
then we just ran out of money.
So
But I
what
think that's,
We'll
I
have
think
to
that's
look
the
at.
point. In fact, I think of my recollection was the original plans had us going to 2 stories on the
Yes.
one side and
On
that
Monowes,
had to be cut
for
back,
sure.
right?
Right.
Absolutely
No,
true.
And the
Yeah.
main-
On Central.
No, on Central.
Central.
On
two-story.
Central. Oh, I
Yes,
thought
sorry.
on Monowes as well.
No, that was
Okay.
right.
So
Yeah.
let me just sum it up this way. I want to be very clear on this because things sometimes get misinterpreted. That in the end, the generator was not included. In the beginning, we'd have to look back to see if it was included in the scope of the work for $9,247,000.
So it might have wound up on a punch list, for example,
Perhaps,
perhaps.
yes.
Meaning it was originally included, but then,
We'd have to
we didn't-
check.
we
Ed and I,
didn't
we
get to it.
could
Okay.
check that, but
Yeah, you can find out.
but
Sure.
anyway, the bottom line is it wasn't included.
Okay, so it wasn't done.
Or was
Bottom line
it?
is we need a new one.
The bottom line is we need a new one.
Need a
right.
new one.
And then Chief, just one last question. Again, this is regarding the PSA grant. You mentioned that there's really no impact of this award on the budget. And so I'm just a little bit surprised by that because again, what this really means for the town of North Haven is that we're getting into the ambulance business, that we really have never provided transport to hospitals in our own vehicles. We certainly have allowed our paramedics to go in AMR ambulances, et cetera, in order to accompany critically ill patients that require ALS services. But we've never actually provided our own box ambulances and our own firefighters for transport. So it just seems surprising to me that from an insurance standpoint, from various types of equipment as well as supplies, that there wouldn't be some expenditures associated with this. Could you please address that?
Sure, of course. So one thing to keep in mind is that the ambulance industry, for lack of better words, in the state of Connecticut is very highly regulated.
Mhm.
So whenever you see the words ambulance on a vehicle, know that that vehicle is subject to annual inspections by the State Office of Emergency Medical Services, and has to provide rosters and insurance, certificate of liability, maintenance records, and a whole bunch of paperwork in addition to inspections on an annual basis.
Mhm.
Rescue One has been licensed as an ambulance for about 9 years. It predates my tenure as chief. Chief Lendicio made that an ambulance. And the reason he did so is because, remember, go back to a time when we were being serviced by the prior ambulance company, and we were looking at very, very long arrival times. There was a decision made at that time that we had the ability and the type of vehicle that we had to make it an ambulance, and we wanted to be protected from a statutory standpoint to be able to take that individual and not have to continue to wait for an ambulance arrival time of 15, 20 minutes, sometimes longer. And if it was a critical individual, transport that person to the hospital ourselves with the rescue that was credentialed and licensed as an ambulance for the last 9 years. I carried that same mindset into my tenure as chief, and although the PSA did not allow us to do so, it's also the last thing the ambulance company was about to fight was because if we were transporting, it's because their arrival time was as bad as it was. So it was one of those things where the ambulance company never fought it, and we did it when we had to do it. So there were times that we did provide transport in our ambulance to the hospitals even pre the award of the PSA. It was not the routine, but it would happen. The more frequent occurrence would be, you're right, that our paramedic would get into the back of an ambulance and assist to the hospital. So after being awarded a PSA, now we're starting to look at the ambulances that are responding to North Haven and our ability to be able to manage multiple calls that are taking place in town at any given time, and wanting to make sure that we don't take out of service both our rescue that has the ability to respond to other calls and an ambulance for one patient. We're taking out 2 vehicles for one patient. Prior to this, we didn't necessarily have the ability to make that decision. And the ambulance was a regional asset. Well, these ambulances now are dedicated North Haven assets. So now we're shifting our mindset, and we have the ability to do so. We have the legal ability now to do so, owning the PSA, to be able to say it makes no sense to take 2 vehicles out of service for one patient. We'll take the patient if it's an ALS call and there's not a paramedic on scene from the ambulance company. We'll take the patient in our rescue, which is certified as an ambulance, has been for 9 years, and we'll transport them to the hospital. Then we take the ambulance from the ambulance company and put it immediately back in service to serve the taxpayers of North Haven. It makes the most sense. There's not going to be an increase in cost. It's been an ambulance for 9 years. Our insurance policy has reflected it's been an ambulance for 9 years. We continue to update the paperwork. In fact, the renewal just came in this past week, and you will not see an increase in cost at all associated with this. In fact, the only thing you're going to see is an increase in revenue.
Okay, so thank you for that information. But in fact, we actually have 2 ambulances, right? And are both of them certified and by the state as ambulances?
We only have 2 ambulances as of about 2 months ago. Prior to that, again, the highly regulated industry of ambulances, the last ambulance company denied our multiple requests to have the second ambulance that we had, the second vehicle that we had registered as an ambulance. Mm-hmm. When we took ownership of the PSA, we then had the ability to make that second vehicle that we had all along that meets the requirements in terms of chassis type and so forth to make it an ambulance. Now that just allows us to be able to have some redundancy. Again, remember that all these apparatus are extremely dependent upon maintenance. And when you get them to start, they need to start. And so the rescue that we have, our main rescue, when it does go out of service, we need to have another ambulance in its place so we can continue to provide the same service to the taxpayers in North Haven. So that's why that second rescue was just certified as an ambulance in the last, let's say, 8 weeks. And now nobody can fight us on it because we own the PSA.
Right. And, but again, and I'll defer to both Mr. Monaco and Mr. Hallahan, who served on the work group, but my understanding was the real advantage to the PSA award was not just to get the data and to control the response time, but also to contract out the actual ambulance transport abilities because, in fact, if we do have our ambulance crew tied up in transporting patients that are overlapping calls and inability to respond to calls here in town, medical calls that is, in theory should only be increased. Whereas if we contracted it out and we required our ambulance service, Nelson in this case, to have a paramedic available at all times for all calls, then we shouldn't have to be even involved in that. And so then we wouldn't be tying up our firefighters. So is there some potential for this PSAR to actually further strain our already strained fire department?
The contract with the ambulance company would have to revisit it, but I think that we need to get ourselves out of thinking in terms of 1 or 2 calls at a time and think about the dozens of calls that take place over the course of a day at times.
Yeah.
And that time that it takes for an ambulance to transport somebody to the hospital, transition the level of care, conduct the appropriate reports, clean, and come back. There's constantly going to be that time. These are moving assets at any given time. And if you're talking 1 or 2 calls at a time, yeah, the paramedic that we require of Nelson ambulance, as you referenced, to be in service at all times, this would never be an issue for us. In fact, our paramedic would never have to transport or assist in. But that doesn't happen in real life. In real life, there's dozens of calls taking place at any given time. And then the other thing to keep in mind as well is, remember those calls that I identified that the fire department's not responding to, but an ambulance still is. So there's enough healthcare facilities in town where there's times that our 2 ambulances are tied up at those healthcare facilities that the fire department didn't have to respond to. But now 911 calls start coming in that the fire department does have to go to. And the ambulance company just may not have a paramedic available because a paramedic is tied up on other calls who are in town. I can't impress upon you enough, and I encourage you to visit a firehouse. I don't know that you have yet. Visit a firehouse, spend some time with us, see how busy it is, and get an appreciation for how many calls are taking place at any given time. And you'll realize it's not quite as easy as, a paramedic for a call at any given time.
No, and that's exactly my point, is because the firehouse is so busy, I don't think that we should be dependent upon a single ambulance in our fleet, and then a single ambulance from Nelson that has a paramedic. I think we should build into a contract that Nelson, who happens to be our contractor, should provide as many paramedics as we need in any given shift in order to serve the best interests of the people of North Haven. Because again, if we tie up our 1 ambulance, that's 20% of a shift of 10 people, right?
Yes.
Right, so if they're off down at Yale New Haven Hospital, they can't come back.
Identify call volume. Remember that we just took this transition over in October.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I referenced at an earlier meeting, there's calls that are taking place now, present day, that we never knew of that were taking place before. We're still trying to identify what the call volume in North Haven is truly going to be. And there are some plans for healthcare facilities in town that are going to continue to strain the EMS services further in town, both through the fire department and through the ambulance company. And yes, that may need to be revisited, but we're not there yet. And the fire department continues to provide ALS service when it's needed.
Great, thank you very much, Chief, I appreciate it.
Sure.
Michael, do you have something else?
Yes.
Go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because, I want to echo what Nancy's just asking right here, because, you know, you and I.
What's the question?
Monica, you and I, we spent a lot of time looking into all this, and amongst our recommendations for the PSA, when we were able to retain it, or whether we were able to renegotiate the one that existed, was 100% paramedic response for ALS related service calls. And the only way you get there is to put it into the specs of the PSA. And the PSA says at a minimum, 1 ambulance will be staged in the town of North Haven. Thought it would be 2, it's 1. All right, now we know about the idea of backfilling because it says right here.
There's two ambulances.
There's 2, it's 2.
One of them has a paramedic on it at all
Yeah.
times.
Right.
1 ambulance will be staged.
Yeah.
No, wait a minute, availability, at a minimum, 1 ALS ambulance will be staged in the town of North Haven. So there's 2, but 1 has to be ALS.
So one has a paramedic,
Correct.
the second one does not have.
Okay, now, all right. I'm not sure I'm reading it that way.
Okay,
It'll be backfilled with an additional ambulance at either the ALS or BLS level of care.
okay.
They're a medical company. I don't see why they can't get 1 paramedic on every vehicle that they serve to us. But then, when the medical call occurs and we send our people and their people to the same call, at first we didn't understand why, but in a recent meeting, the chief did explain that it's more for management of the scene as opposed to how many people need to service a patient at any given time. Is that not correct, Chief?
That's correct, yeah. You need to think about the chaotic this of a scene at times, in the fact that 2 people alone cannot manage a scene and a patient and family and so forth, and move a patient sometimes. Yeah, so it's a collective effort to respond to EMS calls.
Right, that's why when I had an incident a year and a half ago with an elderly lady who might be having a heart attack, we weren't sure, the rescue came and the ladder truck, and the pumper, and an ambulance came. So we had 3 vehicles, and we had 6 or 8 people there. And yes,
Well, the code was, because it was a heart attack, it was coded that way. He sends the paramedic, he sends the engine to support them if they have to do CPR or whatever, and to manage the scene, and the ambulance responds to transport.
Right.
The ambulance has a paramedic on it, she goes to the ambulance goodbye. If the ambulance doesn't have a paramedic, the chief has his person stay with the patient.
yeah.
I think
Okay.
that's kind of cut dry.
All right, and then when it's time to transport someone to the hospital, you're saying that the first option is for us to transport and get the Nelson ambulance back?
I don't think so.
No,
No. it's not
only
the
if
same.
the BLS ambulance provided by the ambulance company and the patient requires ALS care.
Only if a paramedic's required, and they don't have a paramedic, will North Haven transport.
Okay,
That's what he's saying.
all right.
If it doesn't require, and
Right,
it's just
because
basic
I'm
care,
in agreement with
the ambulance
Nancy,
requires.
what we wanna do is we wanna get our fire people back at the firehouse.
The fire,
And the
Chief, I'm
rescue,
sorry.
our rescue back, more, because they can always backfill with another
I'm
ambulance.
sorry if I'm talking for him, but if the person requires ALS care and the paramedic, or the ambulance company's person cannot provide that, even before the PA, whenever, we always took over the scene, or we always have the scene, but our paramedic would go in their ambulance, and then North Haven would follow, pick up their guy and bring them back. Now, it sounds like what we're doing is actually transport, if they show up and they don't have a paramedic and it requires a paramedic, we can actually just transport it in our ambulance, because he's going there anyway, to pick up our paramedic.
Mhm.
Am I correct, Chief?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
I have to admit, it was a little confusing. When I was hearing Nancy's questions, I was thinking that what the chief was saying was that our first alternative in all cases would be to send our guys down to the
No.
hospital. Because
Only at the level of care that ambulance is providing, it requires ALS care, and they do not have.
right, and that point's been made in the past.
That's
And
the only time, right,
And they,
Chief?
and the ambulance company does not have an ALS member.
If
No.
if on that particular
Okay,
ambulance. is
yeah,
not
that could have
ALS
been written into, to the contract, because I do agree with Ms. Wendy's letter that came to us in December that said she was under the assumption that this was gonna be a basic part of this new PSA. That they will always have a paramedic on any ambulance provided to the town. So I don't know whether that was impractical or why that couldn't be written in that way, but.
Well, it still means there's a paramedic on scene. We have our own paramedics on scene.
It's always a paramedic.
Yeah, but the more paramedics they have, the more our people can return to the firehouse. We want our people back at the firehouse for a fire.
Because the reality is, if there is an ALS scene that requires transport, and then there's a fire, we have no ambulance to go to that fire, right?
Well,
We don't.
On an engine. No,
We don't have an ambulance, and you need, Chief, I'm speaking for you, I'm terribly sorry, but don't we need an ambulance at a fire?
There's an ambulance requested for any fire to treat any occupants that we rescue from the building. But remember that the way that contract's written, the ambulance company can also call in other ambulances. And I can tell you that since we converted over to this in October, we have had very few times in which our current ambulance company had to rely on mutual aid. So they are backfilling quite regularly. To answer the question about paramedics, it's not conducive to business for ambulances to staff every ambulance with a paramedic. You won't find any ambulance companies that do that. There's enough calls that don't require a paramedic. And again, whatever that number is, maybe it's 40% of the calls require an ALS intervention at any given time. So for 60% of those calls, and again, I don't know those numbers for certain, but they sound about right. The ambulance company can staff it with 2 EMTs, and it's much more affordable. So you're not going to find that in any ambulance company. And if you do, and if we insist on it, it's going to cost us. And we're better off paying for that expense through the dual role of having a paramedic firefighter that can serve multiple purposes.
And Chief, if there is a house fire and you need to send an ambulance to the house fire just in case, do you also require a paramedic for that particular situation?
No, it's a paramedic that we can provide through our staff if we have to. We just need the ambulance at that point, and it's simply going to be for smoke inhalation or burns and something to that extent. So that's not something we necessarily require an ALS ambulance for, although the company will likely send an ALS ambulance, but it's not a requirement necessarily.
So you would shift a firefighter who's on scene to fight the fire in order to serve as a paramedic if necessary?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't say undoubtedly for every scene it will be treated that way. It depends in large part on what we finally arrive on scene. I mean, I'm not going to get into details on it because I don't want to be bound to anything. But we will do whatever we need to do to most effectively manage the patient and the fire scene, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And in reality, on average, there's 3 paramedics on every shift. Even though they're not acting as paramedics, there are 3 licensed paramedics usually on every shift.
Right, but that's my whole point. If they're functioning as, I thought that you always had to stay with your vehicle. I thought you always have to stay with your vehicle. So what he's saying is that they could still function as a paramedic even though you're assigned to the ladder truck or assigned to, whatever. Yep.
And they can still function as a paramedic if they arrive on the engine armada lease or the rescue. It's the only way that they can function. Even if I have a paramedic assigned to a different apparatus, if that apparatus needs to be inspected by the state to be qualified to carry paramedic supplies and the narcotics that we carry. So again, I don't know why we're getting into this as much as we are. It doesn't really cover the budget, but
You're right.
We'll do what we have to do.
Chief, you're right.
Yeah, I want to close by reminding everybody of this. If the questions are designed to have a financial question, that's the Board of Finance's purview. The Board of Finance has no purview over the operational aspect of this fire department. That purview is the chief, myself, Ed, and the Fire Commission. We set policy. So we can't continue to get into policy here as the Board of Finance. Our role here as the Board of Finance, they're financial questions, not policy questions.
I believe that our function is to provide the best services at the lowest cost, right?
So it's their function to provide the policy and the service.
Absolutely.
It's
And to
our
the extent
function-
that we make decisions regarding the budget that impact his policy, then we do have some role in this.
But we cannot continue to question policy.
I'm not questioning policy. I'm simply asking for clarification from the chief.
All right, so
That's
he
all.
gave you the clarification, he gave us the answers, okay?
Is there anything else from the chief?
Yeah, we are also here to review the PSA that we didn't get to do in November.
Why,
Why?
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 I lost you on that one.
Is there a cost to the PSA? Is there,
That's one of my questions.
right. So Paul, why don't you, I thought we've answered this many times. Paul,
What? Oh,
Paul, repeat what you said on the PSA, the cost of the PSA.
Sure, so there's no cost, if there was, you'd see it reflected on my budget presentation for this year. There's no cost associated with the signing of the contract with the ambulance company, no cost attributed to the acquisition of the PSA for the town of North Haven on the fire department budget. Again, if anything, there's an increase in revenue.
okay, well so the question was, not only an increase in revenue, are there any is there anything the town is gaining off PSA that will impact financial savings, maybe reduce manpower needs or anything that's budgetary?
There's not, no.
No, I think
Now, I mean, we do understand that it leads to an improvement.
improvement in
quality-
service.
quality
That's what it
of
does.
service.
That's what it does.
There's no doubt about that.
And where the Board of Finance comes in, I said this before, you will see a slight increase in the revenue projection in this fiscal year for that line item.
Yeah, it's basically, it just improves service.
Yeah. Okay, now the rescue vehicles, right now, we have what, is Rescue 2 worth adding as a rescue vehicle down at Montawees?
No, you're getting into operational.
We're back operational.
You're back on operation again. He's staffing that paramedic on an engine because it's performing two functions.
Yeah. All right, well, I just.
Am I correct, chief?
Correct, absolutely.
It's providing two functions. It's operating as a frontline fire suppression apparatus with a paramedic that can respond to ALL service if needed on that part of town.
Yeah,
So if he dropped it to just an ambulance
Right.
unit, he
Now,
just lost the fire suppression.
if we purchase another rescue truck, will another rescue vehicle be able to be stationed down at Montawees? I know they don't have an additional garage bay down there.
You really don't, you can't really do that, and maybe I'm talking out of turn, and please correct me. Because the apparatus requires certain staffing. He can't just pull a person off the engine and run the engine with two people and put one person in a ambulance.
Yeah,
He can't do that,
okay.
correct?
That's correct.
So that's kind of where we go. It would involve a lot more additional staffing to add
Well,
another
right, so when it comes to the
apparatus.
Board of Finance, the question would be, would it be worth our while to supply the fire department to purchase another SUV or fly car to substitute for some of the engine response and ladder truck response to medical calls?
No, because you'd have to increase staffing again. Because once you put that paramedic in a fly car, you've just diminished the engine to two men, and it's now not functioning as an engine any longer.
Rich, that's what
I
I
could have
was
been a
thinking.
fireman, I swear.
Rich, I was thinking of the, chief says he sends out a driver, a lieutenant, and a paramedic.
There's three people on an engine.
And that's why I was asking him about going to the landing. What vehicles does he take to the landing? Because he had 88 calls. And I'm saying 99% of them calls are not gonna be fire, they're gonna be
Yeah,
medical.
they probably were also mostly all medical.
So to add to what Mike
But
was saying,
if-
why couldn't we get a rig just to send them through?
No,
knowing that-
he would normally respond the ambulance. If the ambulance wasn't available, he would respond the engine.
I'm sorry?
If the ambulance wasn't available, the rescue unit wasn't available because it was on a call, and he got a call from that facility, his next response piece of apparatus would be the engine. If it was a really seriously critical call, he would send the engine and the ladder truck. Michael's suggestion of adding a fly car and putting a paramedic in the fly car at Montaukese as an example, the downside is it just took that engine out of service because you can't operate with 2 people. You gotta look at it more that equipment operates with a minimum number of people. The rescue unit needs a minimum of 2 people. An engine needs a minimum of 3 people. I assume the ladder truck can get by with 2, but I'm not sure.
But he has 10 people per shift.
More than
3,
one
4, 5,
piece of
yeah, he's got all those pieces of equipment though. He's running the ladder truck, he's running an engine, he's running the ladder truck, he's running 2 engines, and he's running a rescue unit. He's running 4 pieces of apparatus all the time.
If I could just intervene, again, if you're assuming a 10-person shift, and I'm not implying that I'm dictating policy, I'm just making a suggestion. Currently, we have 3 people on engine 1, 3 people on Montaukese engine, at least 3 shifts out of the 4, 2 people on the ladder truck, and 2 people on the ambulance currently. So that's 10.
That's 10.
That's 10. If you shifted to 4 people on engine 1, 2 people on the ladder, and 2 people on each of the ambulances, that's 10, right?
Ms. Farah, where was
Yeah,
you
but you
looking to
just-
put the engine of Montaukese? Did you miss the slide where I talked
No,
about
no,
the impact?
I understand, but if the vast majority of your calls are actually medical in nature, then I think that I'm just making a suggestion that perhaps the fleet should reflect the proportion of calls that are medical in nature.
I will
That's all.
say your suggestion basically just took a firefighting apparatus that was placed in Montaukese section of town to reduce response time in that section of town. You just eliminated it. And you made that firehouse only able really to respond to medical calls.
Correct.
So when he had those kitchen fires that he showed up, they wouldn't have been able to respond to it. When he showed those units responding to, in less than 2 minutes to house fire, or electrical fires and such, that wouldn't have happened. Because the only thing that would have been coming out of that house would have been a rescue unit, not a fire engine.
It would have been either the main headquarters
Yeah, which added
pumper
time to
or
it. And by the
that.
way, Chief, just as a side note, in your slides, you
Yes.
had the symbol backwards for less than.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
We're gonna give you a little math class while we're here too.
Don't worry about it. But
But that's
again,
kind of-
we're also increasing our repair costs by sending the Montaukese vehicle out to all of these medical calls, right?
Yep.
We absolutely are. So anyway,
Yeah,
again,
I'm sure it
I'm not
costs
trying
more
to
respond
dictate
the
anything. I'm
ambulance.
just suggesting.
I'm sure maintenance costs on an engine is more than maintenance costs on an ambulance.
Absolutely.
Of course it is. But
Absolutely.
obviously, the whole purpose of
And a
putting
ladder
the
truck,
engine
too.
there was to reduce response time for a fire as well.
Right. But again, if the proportion is the vast majority of them are medical,
So do we tell those half a dozen fires that he had there that, you just gotta wait 5 more minutes? You-
I have
you-
all the confidence in the fire committee.
So do I,
and the
at
chief
this
to-
point.
To manage this properly,
Yes.
so.
Any more questions from board members? Since I was supposed to be last, but any more questions from board members?
I just want to say that congratulations to the chief and others on the acquisition of the PSA for the town of North Haven. I'm proud to have Chief Januszewski as our fire chief. He's a credit to his profession. God bless you all.
Chief, in
Thank you.
in closing, I'll just add, I think this is one of your better presentations over the years. So you're getting
Nice
better in
job.
time.
Good, I
absolutely.
hope to get really good in a couple of years.
Paul, I'll see you over here shortly. Valerie's waiting. We gotta get on this vaccine distribution facility, okay?
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks. See ya.
All right, take care.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.